The courtroom went completely silent when Daniel Mercer said the 5 words his family never expected to hear. "I trust my wife." His mother stopped breathing for a moment. His older brother Marcus stared at him as if he were looking at a stranger. Even the attorney who had asked the question seemed surprised by how quickly Daniel had answered. For nearly 40 years, Daniel had been the son who kept the peace, the brother who stayed quiet, the man who avoided taking sides, the person his family called whenever something needed to be fixed. And now, with his entire family sitting only a few feet away, Daniel had just chosen his wife over them. Or at least, that's what everyone in that courtroom believed. But there was a secret they didn't know. Daniel hadn't suddenly decided to trust Rachel that morning. He hadn't woken up on the day of the trial and chosen his marriage over his family. The truth was far more complicated. He had been learning to trust his wife for years. And the first step happened on a completely ordinary Tuesday evening when he almost made a decision so small that nobody thought it mattered. A decision involving a piece of paper, a pen, and a signature. If Daniel had signed that document when his brother first placed it in front of him, there might never have been a courtroom. He lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, with his wife, Rachel. Their home wasn't enormous. It wasn't the kind of place people photographed for magazines. It was simply comfortable. A 2-story brick house with a small backyard, an aging wooden fence, and a kitchen that Rachel insisted needed repainting even though Daniel thought the walls looked perfectly fine. They had been married for 6 years. 6 years of grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator. 6 years of arguing over thermostat settings. 6 years of weekend errands, unexpected expenses, birthdays, family dinners, work stress, and late-night conversations about whether they were ready to replace the old car. Their marriage wasn't dramatic, and that was precisely why it mattered. Daniel didn't fall in love with Rachel because she made his life feel like a movie. He loved her because she made ordinary life feel manageable. When his work became stressful, she listened. When her engineering projects became overwhelming, Daniel cooked dinner. When money was tight, they sat at the kitchen table and went through the numbers together. When one of them made a mistake, the other didn't pretend it hadn't happened. They dealt with it. That was their marriage. Not perfection. Partnership. But there was one part of Daniel's life Rachel had never been able to completely reach. His family. There might never have been accusations. There might never have been a family divided by lawyers, evidence, and painful truths. And Rachel might never have discovered just how difficult it was for her husband to say no to the people who raised him. So how did an ordinary family property dispute become the moment when a husband was forced to choose between family loyalty and the truth? And why did Daniel eventually look directly at the people who expected him to protect them and say, without hesitation, "I trust my wife. Stay with me," because the answer began long before the lawsuit. It began with a man who thought keeping everyone happy was the same thing as being a good person. And sometimes, that mistake can cost more than money. It can cost you your peace. It can cost you your relationships. And if you're not careful, it can even make you lose the ability to recognize what you truly believe. Welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where the stories aren't just about love, they're about the choices that test love, the mistakes that shape us, and the lessons we carry forward. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that love isn't always about grand gestures or perfect endings. Sometimes love is simply having someone beside you who tells you the truth, when everyone else wants you to hear what feels comfortable. And if you've ever struggled with choosing between keeping the peace and standing up for what you believe is right, stay with this story. Because Daniel's biggest mistake wasn't trusting the wrong person. It was spending too many years believing that saying nothing was the safest choice. Daniel Mercer was 38 years old when everything began to change. His mother, Elaine, had raised Daniel and Marcus after their father died. Marcus was the older son, 12 years older than Daniel. From childhood, Marcus had been treated as the responsible one. He handled repairs. He helped with bills. He accompanied their mother to appointments. When their father became sick, Marcus had been the one who seemed to know what to do. Daniel admired him. For years, he also feared disappointing him. That difference mattered, because admiration can build respect, but fear can build obedience. Daniel didn't realize which one had been controlling him until he married Rachel. Rachel noticed. She noticed every time Daniel received a phone call from his mother and immediately changed his plans. She noticed how he apologized whenever he disagreed with Marcus. She noticed how often he said, "It's easier if I just let it go." At first, Rachel didn't challenge him. She watched. She listened. She waited. Then one evening, after Daniel had cancelled their dinner plans because Marcus needed help with something that could easily have waited until morning, Rachel finally asked him a question. "Daniel." He looked up from his phone. "Yeah. Do you actually want to go?" Daniel frowned. "Go where?" "To Marcus's house." Daniel glanced at the clock. "I told him I'd come." "I know. So I'll go." Rachel nodded. Then she said quietly, "That's not what I asked." Daniel didn't answer. Rachel wasn't angry. That somehow made the question harder. "Do you want to go?" she repeated. Daniel looked at his wife. "No." "Then why are you going?" "Because he needs me." Rachel studied him for a moment. "Does he need you?" Daniel sighed. "Rachel." "No, I'm serious." She put her phone down. "Does he need you, or does he need you to say yes?" Daniel didn't have an answer. That question stayed with him, because for the first time, he began to wonder whether his family had become accustomed to his kindness, or simply accustomed to his compliance. And that distinction would soon become impossible to ignore. 3 months later, Daniel's mother called him on a Tuesday afternoon. He was sitting in his office reviewing construction estimates when his phone vibrated. "Mom," Daniel answered. "Hey, Mom." "Daniel, I need you to come by tonight." His mother's voice sounded unusually serious. "Is everything okay?" "It's about your father's property." Daniel sat back in his chair. His father had left behind a small rental property on the east side of town. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it had sentimental value. His father had spent years repairing the place himself. After his death, the property became one of the few remaining physical reminders of him. Daniel had always assumed that he and Marcus would eventually decide together what to do with it. "What's going on?" Daniel asked. "Marcus has a plan." Daniel immediately became cautious. "What kind of plan?" "We'll explain when you get here." There was something about the way she said it that bothered him. "Can you tell me now?" "Daniel, just come over." He hesitated. Then his mother added, "You'll need to sign something." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Sign what?" "Nothing complicated." That phrase should have ended the conversation. Instead, it became the beginning of everything. Daniel looked at the documents on his desk, then at the clock. He could already imagine Marcus sitting at their mother's dining table, explaining the plan confidently. He could imagine his mother agreeing. He could imagine himself sitting there, listening, nodding, and eventually picking up a pen. Because that was what Daniel had done for most of his life. He had made things easy. He had made disagreements disappear. He had mistaken surrender for peace. But this time, something stopped him. Maybe it was Rachel's question. Maybe it was the strange tone in his mother's voice. Or maybe, after years of avoiding uncomfortable questions, Daniel had finally become tired of discovering the answers too late. "I'll come over," he said. His mother sounded relieved. "Good. But I'm not signing anything until I read it." Silence. Only 2 seconds. But Daniel noticed. Then his mother said, "Of course." The call ended. Daniel stared at his phone. He didn't know it yet. But that was the first decision that would eventually lead him into court. And this time, when the pressure came, Daniel was going to have to decide whether he was still the same man his family had always known, or whether he was finally becoming someone who could make a choice of his own. By the time Daniel pulled into his mother's driveway that evening, the sky had already turned dark. The porch light was on. Through the front window, he could see 3 silhouettes moving around the dining room. His mother, Marcus, and someone Daniel didn't recognize. He turned off the engine but didn't immediately get out. His phone was still in his hand. There was a message from Rachel. "You okay?" Daniel stared at it. He almost typed, "Yeah, just family stuff." Instead, he wrote, "I'm not sure yet. I'll call you when I know what's happening." He put the phone away. That small sentence mattered. He hadn't told Rachel what to think. He hadn't asked her to solve the problem. He had simply promised to tell her the truth. Daniel stepped out of the car. Inside, Marcus was standing beside the dining table with several folders spread across it. Their mother sat at the head of the table. The stranger was a middle-aged man wearing a grey suit. Marcus looked up. "Finally." Daniel smiled faintly. "Good to see you too." Marcus ignored the comment. "Sit down." Daniel pulled out a chair. His mother smiled nervously. "I'm glad you came." Daniel looked at the documents. "What is all this?" Marcus placed both hands on the table. "It's about the rental property. I figured. We've got an opportunity." Daniel looked toward the man in the grey suit. "Who is this?" Marcus introduced him as a consultant who had helped them develop a plan for renovating and refinancing the property. Daniel listened. The plan sounded reasonable at first. The property needed repairs. The neighborhood had changed. A renovation could increase its value. Marcus had found contractors. He had estimated costs. He had even found a lender willing to finance part of the project. Then Marcus slid a document across the table. "All we need is your signature." Daniel looked down. There it was, a line marked with his name. He picked up the pages. The first few paragraphs seemed straightforward. Then he reached the financial section. He stopped. "What's this?" Marcus leaned forward. "What?" "This liability. That's standard." Daniel looked at him. "Standard for what?" Marcus sighed. Daniel, don't turn this into a whole thing. Daniel read the paragraph again. If the financing isn't repaid under the terms, I'm personally responsible. Marcus waved his hand. It's just language. Daniel looked at the consultant. Is that correct? The man shifted slightly. It's one interpretation of the clause. Daniel's expression changed. One interpretation. Marcus immediately interrupted. You're making this way more complicated than it is. Daniel placed the document on the table. Oh. Marcus frowned. What? I'm asking a reasonable question. You don't trust me? There it was. The question Daniel had been expecting. Not is the project safe. Not did you understand the agreement. Not what concerns you. Just, don't you trust me? For most of his life, that question would have ended the conversation. It would have made him feel guilty. It would have pushed him toward agreement, but something had changed. Daniel looked at his brother. I trust you enough to ask you questions. Marcus stared at him. Their mother looked uncomfortable. The consultant quietly gathered his papers. I think perhaps you should all review this before signing anything. Marcus turned toward him. That's not necessary. The consultant didn't argue. He simply stood. Daniel watched him leave. Then he looked back at Marcus. I want a copy. Marcus folded his arms. Why? Because I'm not signing something I haven't reviewed. You've known me your whole life. And that doesn't change what's written here. Marcus laughed bitterly. This is Rachel. Daniel's expression hardened. Don't bring her into this. She gets in your head. No. Daniel stood. She asks questions. I'm the one responsible for my signature. Their mother finally spoke. Daniel, your father would have trusted Marcus. Daniel looked at her. The sentence hit him harder than Marcus's accusation. His father, the man whose property they were discussing. The man whose memory was being used to push him toward a decision. Daniel took a slow breath. Maybe Dad would have trusted Marcus. He looked down at the documents. But Dad would also have wanted me to understand what I was agreeing to. His mother looked away. Marcus shook his head. You've changed. Daniel didn't deny it. I hope so. He gathered the papers. Marcus reached toward them. Those stay here. Daniel stopped. Why? Because they're family documents. My name is on them. Marcus's jaw tightened. You're really doing this? Daniel nodded. I'm really doing this. He walked toward the door. His mother called after him. Daniel. He stopped. Please don't let this come between you and your brother. Daniel turned around. For a moment, he saw his mother not as the person pressuring him, but as an aging woman frightened that her family was beginning to fall apart. His anger softened. Mom, I'm not trying to destroy anything. Then sign it. Daniel shook his head. That's not how you save a family. He walked outside. The cold air hit his face. He stood beside his car and looked at the documents in his hand. His fingers were trembling slightly, not because he was afraid of the paperwork, because saying no to his family felt strangely like betrayal. He sat behind the wheel. Before starting the engine, he called Rachel. She answered almost immediately. Hey! Hey! You sound tired. Daniel looked through the windshield. I didn't sign anything. There was a pause. Okay. I asked for the documents. Good. Daniel frowned. That's it? Rachel laughed softly. What did you expect me to say? I don't know. Daniel, it's your family. You need to make your own decision. He leaned back. Marcus thinks you've changed me. Rachel became quiet. Do you think I have? No. Are you sure? Daniel considered it. Then he smiled. You've changed how I think. That's different. Yeah. He looked down at the paperwork. I think I spent a lot of years believing that if everyone else was happy, everything was okay. Rachel's voice softened. And now? Now I'm realizing that sometimes everyone being happy just means nobody is telling the truth. Rachel didn't respond immediately. Then she said, Come home. Daniel smiled. I will. When Daniel arrived home, Rachel was in the kitchen. She had made dinner. Nothing fancy. Chicken, rice, vegetables. Ordinary. Comforting. Daniel placed the documents on the counter. Rachel looked at them. Do you want me to read them? Daniel hesitated. Not yet. She nodded. Okay. He sat down. Rachel brought him a plate. They ate quietly for several minutes. Then Daniel finally spoke. Would you have signed it? Rachel looked at him. I don't know. That surprised him. I thought you'd say no. I probably would have wanted more information. Daniel smiled. You really don't like telling me what to do. Oh. Why? Rachel set her fork down. Because I married a grown man. Daniel laughed. She continued. I love you. I can give you my opinion. I can tell you when I think something is dangerous. I can ask questions, but I don't want a marriage where one person makes every decision and the other simply follows. Daniel looked at her. Even if you think I'm wrong? Especially then. He smiled. Rachel reached across the table. Daniel, I don't need you to choose me over your family. He looked down. I know. I need you to choose honesty. Those words stayed with him. That night, after Rachel went to bed, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table. He opened the documents again. He read every page. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The property wasn't simply being renovated. The ownership structure was being changed. And if Daniel signed the document, he would be giving up rights he had never agreed to surrender. He stared at the page, then at his signature line. For years, Daniel had believed the biggest danger in family relationships was conflict. Now he was beginning to understand something else. Sometimes, the greater danger was signing away your voice just to avoid an argument. He closed the folder. He didn't know how bad things were about to become. But for the first time in his life, Daniel had made a choice without asking whether everyone else would approve. And that choice had already changed the balance of his family. Because Marcus wasn't angry that Daniel had questions. Marcus was angry that Daniel had stopped obeying. And the next morning, Daniel would discover just how much his brother was willing to do to make him change his mind. If you were Daniel, would you have signed the document to keep peace with your family, or would you have stopped and investigated everything first? Think about it, because sometimes the smallest decision is the one that reveals who truly respects you. And Daniel's smallest decision was about to create his family's biggest problem. If Daniel's story already has you wondering what you would do in his position, don't leave yet, because this is only the beginning. Would you have signed that document just to keep peace with your family, or would you have stopped and asked questions like Daniel did? Comment. Truth. If you believe you should never sign something you don't fully understand, and if this story is already speaking to you, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson so you don't miss what happens next. Because Daniel thought refusing to sign one document would simply create an uncomfortable family conversation. He had no idea it would eventually put him across a courtroom from the people he had spent his entire life trying to protect. Chapter 2 is where everything begins to change. The next morning, Daniel woke up before his alarm. For several seconds, he lay still, staring at the ceiling. Then he remembered the documents. He remembered Marcus's voice. You don't trust me? And, more importantly, he remembered his own answer. I trust you enough to ask questions. It sounded reasonable now, but the night before, it had felt almost rebellious. Daniel reached for his phone. There were 2 missed calls from his mother. 3 messages from Marcus. The first said, we need to talk. The second, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. The third was shorter. Call me. Daniel stared at the screen. His old instinct was immediate. Call Marcus. Apologize. Explained that he hadn't meant anything by refusing to sign. Promised to review the paperwork quickly. Make everyone comfortable again. He almost pressed the call button. Then he stopped. He put the phone down. That tiny hesitation was becoming a habit. And Daniel was beginning to realize that habits were often built from moments nobody else noticed. He got dressed and went downstairs. Rachel was already in the kitchen, standing beside the coffee maker. She looked at him. Bad morning? Daniel held up his phone. Family. Rachel nodded. That explains the face. Daniel smiled. You know, one day, I'm going to wake up, and you'll have something positive to say about my face. I said nothing negative. You didn't have to. She laughed. Daniel poured himself coffee. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rachel asked, Are you going to call him? I don't know. Okay. Daniel looked at her. That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Maybe tell me what I should do. Rachel leaned against the counter. Do you want my opinion? Yes. I think you should call your brother when you're calm enough to listen and speak without trying to make him happy. Daniel nodded slowly. And if he gets angry, then he'll be angry. Daniel sighed. You're very comfortable with other people's anger. No, Rachel smiled. I've just learned that someone being angry doesn't automatically mean you've done something wrong. Daniel thought about that. It was a lesson he had never learned growing up. In his family, anger had always been treated like an emergency. If Marcus became angry, everyone adjusted. If his mother became upset, everyone changed plans. If Daniel disagreed, he was expected to explain himself until somebody was satisfied. There had always been an invisible rule. The person who becomes most uncomfortable gets to decide what happens next. Daniel had spent years following that rule without realizing it, and the rule had started when he was a boy. Daniel was 8 years old when he first learned that saying yes could make a problem disappear. His father had come home late from work. Marcus, who was 12 at the time, wanted to borrow their father's old baseball glove. Daniel wanted it too. It was one of the few things his father had that Daniel considered special. He had been waiting all afternoon to use it. Marcus walked into the room. "I need Dad's glove." Daniel shook his head. "I'm using it." Marcus stared at him. "For what?" "To play outside." "I'm playing with my friends." Daniel held the glove tighter. "I want to use it." Marcus reached for it. Daniel pulled away. Then their mother entered the room. "What is going on?" Marcus immediately said, "Daniel won't let me use Dad's glove." Daniel looked at his mother. "I was using it first." His mother sighed. "Daniel, just let your brother have it." "But, please." That one word changed everything. Daniel handed Marcus the glove. Marcus walked outside. His mother smiled. "Thank you." Daniel nodded. He didn't know why he felt strangely empty. But he remembered something important. When he said yes, the tension disappeared. When he said no, everyone became uncomfortable. So he learned, not consciously, not deliberately, but he learned, say yes. Keep things calm. Don't make your mother choose. Don't make your father angry. Don't challenge Marcus. Don't create problems. Years passed. The situations became bigger. Marcus wanted to borrow Daniel's car. Daniel said yes. Marcus needed money. Daniel helped. Marcus asked Daniel to cover for him when he was late to a family event. Daniel made excuses. Marcus made plans involving the family property. Daniel nodded. None of those individual decisions seemed important enough to create a confrontation. That was the problem. Small compromises rarely announce themselves as the beginning of a pattern. They arrive disguised as convenience. "It's just this once. It's easier this way. I'll deal with it later. He's my brother. She's my mother." Daniel had spent years saying those things, and eventually his family stopped asking whether he agreed. They simply assumed he would. By the time Daniel was 26, Marcus had moved back to Ohio after a failed business venture in another state. Daniel had already started working full-time. Marcus was struggling financially. One evening, Marcus showed up at Daniel's apartment. "I need a favor." Daniel already knew what that meant. "How much?" Marcus smiled. "That's why you're my favorite brother. I'm your only brother." "Exactly." Daniel laughed. Marcus explained that he needed help covering a payment. It wasn't a huge amount. Daniel had enough savings. He transferred the money. Marcus promised to repay him in 2 weeks. 2 weeks became 2 months. Daniel eventually stopped asking. When Rachel later heard the story, she asked him a simple question. "Did he pay you back?" Daniel shook his head. "Why didn't you ask?" "It's fine, Daniel. He was going through a difficult time." Rachel nodded. "I understand." Then she asked, "Was he going through a difficult time, or were you afraid asking for your money back would make him uncomfortable?" Daniel didn't answer, because again, she had found the question underneath the question. That was one of the reasons Daniel loved Rachel. She didn't lecture him. She didn't tell him that his family was terrible. She didn't demand that he cut anyone off. She simply asked questions that forced him to examine his own behavior. They met at a community volunteer event. Rachel had been helping organize a neighborhood rebuilding project. Daniel had volunteered through his company. They spent the first day carrying supplies, checking measurements, and solving small problems. There was no dramatic moment, no instant certainty. Daniel simply noticed that Rachel did what she said she would do. If she promised to call someone, she called. If she made a mistake, she admitted it. If she disagreed, she explained why. And when Daniel once asked her opinion about a work decision, she didn't immediately tell him what he wanted to hear. She said, "I think you're wrong." Daniel laughed. "That's direct. You asked. Most people would say something softer. I can soften the words." She smiled. "But if you want my honest answer, I'd rather give you that." Daniel remembered the conversation years later, because that was the first time he understood something he had never considered. Honesty didn't have to sound like rejection. Someone could disagree with you and still respect you. Someone could tell you no and still love you. Someone could challenge you without trying to control you. Rachel taught him that slowly, not through speeches, through consistency. When they got married, Daniel thought his life would simply become more peaceful. Instead, it became more honest. That distinction mattered. They had disagreements. Rachel wanted to save more aggressively. Daniel wanted to travel. Rachel believed they needed a newer car. Daniel insisted the old one had another year left. They disagreed about where to spend Thanksgiving. They disagreed about whether Daniel should accept a promotion that required more travel. But they had a rule. Neither person was allowed to punish the other for having an opinion. If Rachel said no, Daniel couldn't make her feel guilty. If Daniel disagreed, Rachel couldn't mock him. And when they couldn't agree, they kept talking. That didn't mean every disagreement ended happily. It meant they didn't use anger to force an answer. Daniel began to understand that this was what partnership looked like, which was why his family's reaction to the property documents felt increasingly strange. At work, nobody expected Daniel to sign a contract he hadn't reviewed. At the bank, nobody told him questions were disrespectful. In professional meetings, people were encouraged to challenge assumptions. Yet at home, with the people he loved most, asking a question suddenly felt like betrayal. Daniel sat at his desk that morning, thinking about that contradiction. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was Marcus. Daniel answered. "Hey." Marcus didn't say hello. "Are you serious?" Daniel leaned back. "About what?" "You know exactly what." "The documents?" "Yes." Daniel took a breath. "I just want to review them." "You don't need to." "That's my decision." Marcus became quiet. Then he said, "Rachel has really changed you." Daniel closed his eyes. There it was again. The easy explanation. Blame Rachel. Because if Rachel was responsible for Daniel's new behavior, Marcus didn't have to consider whether Daniel had simply grown up. Daniel opened his eyes. "Rachel didn't make me ask questions." "She doesn't have to." "Marcus." "What?" "I love my wife." "I never said you didn't." "But you keep talking about her like she's the reason I'm not doing what you want." Marcus sighed. "You're choosing her over your family." Daniel looked out the window. "No." His voice was calm. "I'm choosing to understand what I'm agreeing to." Marcus laughed. "You really believe this is just about paperwork?" Daniel didn't answer, because deep down, he was beginning to understand that it wasn't. It was about something much older. Something that had started with a little boy handing over a baseball glove because saying no made his mother uncomfortable. Something that had followed him into adulthood. Something his family had mistaken for loyalty. And something Daniel was finally learning to call by its real name. Fear of disappointing people. Marcus lowered his voice. "You're making a mistake." Daniel replied, "Maybe." Then he paused. "But if I make it, it'll be my decision." He ended the call. His hands were shaking. But this time, Daniel didn't apologize. And that was when he realized something surprising. Setting a boundary didn't feel powerful. It felt uncomfortable. But perhaps that was the point. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of discomfort. Maybe courage was doing what was necessary while the discomfort was still there. Daniel looked at the document sitting beside his computer. He had no idea that within weeks, those papers would expose a secret his family had been hiding. And when that secret finally came to light, Daniel would have to decide whether protecting his family was worth sacrificing the trust of the woman who had spent 6 years teaching him that love never required him to stop thinking for himself. Daniel didn't tell Rachel about the second call from Marcus. Not immediately. He wasn't hiding it exactly. He simply didn't know how to explain what he was feeling. He had spent most of his life believing that family disagreements were temporary storms. You waited them out. You apologized. You made a compromise. Eventually, everyone sat at the same table again. But this felt different. Marcus wasn't asking Daniel to compromise. He was asking him to surrender the right to question him, and Daniel wasn't sure how to explain that distinction without making everything worse. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open. She looked up. "Home day?" "Yeah." "Work?" Daniel placed his keys on the counter. "Partly." Rachel studied his face. "Marcus." Daniel nodded. She closed the laptop. "What happened?" Daniel sat across from her. "He said, 'You're the reason I'm questioning the property agreement.'" Rachel was silent. Then she asked, "What did you tell him?" "That you're not." "Okay." Daniel frowned. "That's it? What else should I say?" "I don't know." Rachel leaned back. "Daniel, I don't want to become the center of your family's argument." "You aren't." "I know." She paused. "But they think I am." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "He's making me feel like I'm choosing you over them." Rachel looked at him carefully. "Are you?" Daniel stared at her. "I don't know." That answer hurt. He could see it immediately. Rachel didn't become angry. She simply looked down for a moment. Then she said quietly, "That's the first honest answer you've given me tonight." Daniel felt a knot form in his chest. "I didn't mean—" "I know." Rachel closed her laptop. "That's why I'm not angry." She stood and began putting dishes into the sink. Daniel watched her. "Rachel." She stopped. "I love you." She nodded. "I know. I don't want you thinking I'm ashamed of you or that I regret marrying you." "I don't." Then why does it feel like I'm failing everyone? Rachel turned toward him. Because you've been trained to believe that someone has to lose whenever you make a choice. Daniel didn't answer. She continued. But that's not always true. What do you mean? You can love your mother and still disagree with her. Daniel looked down. You can love your brother and still refuse to sign something you don't understand. She paused. And you can love me without making me the reason you stand up for yourself. Daniel looked at her. What if they're right? About what? What if I've changed? Rachel smiled faintly. Then maybe you finally needed to. Daniel laughed softly, but Rachel didn't. She walked over and sat beside him. I don't want a husband who agrees with me all the time. Daniel looked at her. I don't. Oh. Why? Because if I am wrong, I need someone who loves me enough to tell me. Her words were simple, but they landed heavily. Daniel realized that was exactly what made Rachel different from the family system he had grown up in. In his family, disagreement was interpreted as rejection. In his marriage, disagreement was allowed to be information. That difference had seemed small at first. Now it was becoming the foundation of everything. 2 days later, Daniel and Marcus met at a coffee shop. Marcus had requested the meeting. Daniel arrived first. He ordered coffee and sat near the window. 10 minutes later, Marcus walked in. He didn't sit immediately. You've been talking to a lawyer? Daniel looked up. Oh. Marcus pulled out a chair. Are you sure? Yes. Mum says you're asking questions about the ownership structure. I am. Why? Because I want to understand it. Marcus shook his head. You don't trust me. Daniel took a sip of coffee. We've already had this conversation. No, we haven't. Marcus leaned forward. You're acting like I'm trying to steal something. I didn't say that. You don't have to. Daniel stared at his brother. What do you actually want from me? Marcus hesitated. Then he said, I want you to stop making this difficult. Daniel almost smiled. That's not an answer. Marcus's jaw tightened. You know what our family has been through. I do. You know how much Mom sacrificed. I know. And now you're treating her like some stranger who needs to prove everything to you. Daniel shook his head. I'm not treating her like a stranger. Then act like her son. That sentence brought Daniel back to being 8 years old. The baseball glove, his mother's disappointed expression, the feeling that saying no meant becoming a bad son. He felt the old instinct rising. Apologize. Agree. End the conversation. But he didn't. Instead, he said, being her son doesn't mean I stop asking questions. Marcus leaned back. You really believe Rachel has nothing to do with this? Daniel looked at him. I believe I am responsible for my own choices. Marcus laughed. That's not what I asked. Daniel didn't respond. Marcus stared at him for several seconds. Then his voice softened. You know what I think? What? I think Rachel has convinced you that your family is the problem. Daniel shook his head. She hasn't. Then why are you acting like this? Daniel thought about the question, then answered, because I'm starting to realize I never learned how to disagree with you. Marcus became silent. For the first time, Daniel saw something in his brother's expression that looked almost like confusion. Perhaps Marcus had never considered that Daniel's agreement wasn't always agreement. Maybe Marcus had interpreted silence as support. Maybe the family had done the same. Daniel continued, I've spent years saying yes because it was easier. Marcus looked away. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out what I actually believe. Marcus shook his head. You're going to regret this. Daniel stood. Maybe. He reached for his coat. But regret isn't the same thing as being wrong. He walked out. That evening, Rachel was waiting for him. Daniel entered the house and found her sitting on the sofa. How did it go? Daniel removed his jacket. About. Rachel shifted over. Want to talk? Daniel sat down. Marcus thinks you've changed me. Rachel smiled. Apparently I'm very powerful. Daniel laughed. Then, his expression became serious. I told him I never learned how to disagree with him. Rachel nodded. That's probably difficult to admit. It is. What did he say? He said I'd regret it. Rachel looked at him. And do you? Daniel thought for a long moment. Oh, then maybe you're learning. Daniel leaned back. For several minutes, they sat quietly. Then Daniel said, Can I ask you something? Of course. If my family and you disagree about something, how do I know who's right? Rachel smiled. You don't. Daniel frowned. That's not helpful. It is. She turned toward him. You don't decide who's right based on who you love more. Daniel listened. You look at the facts. You listen to both sides. You ask questions. You admit when you don't know. She paused. And then, you make the best decision you can. Daniel nodded. What if I make the wrong decision? Then you learn from it. And you won't be angry. I might be disappointed. Rachel smiled. But disappointment isn't the end of love. Daniel stared at her. That sentence stayed with him. Because in his childhood, disappointment had always felt like the beginning of punishment. Now Rachel was teaching him something different. People could be disappointed and still remain connected. People could disagree and still remain respectful. Love did not have to disappear simply because someone said no. The following Monday, Daniel went back through the property documents. He started with the ownership records, then the proposed renovation agreement, then the financing papers. He compared the dates. Something didn't make sense. The first document listed one ownership arrangement. A later document referred to a different arrangement. Daniel frowned. He pulled out his father's old paperwork. He had kept the files in a box in the basement. Receipts, tax documents, property records, old correspondence. He spread everything across the dining table. Rachel came downstairs and stopped. What are you doing? Looking for something. What? I don't know yet. She didn't ask more. She simply brought him a glass of water. Daniel continued reading. An hour passed. Then another. Finally he found it. A document from years earlier. His father's original property agreement. Daniel read the ownership clause. Then he read the newer paperwork. His heart began beating faster. The new agreement appeared to change something that the original document had specifically protected. He looked at the date. The change had been made before Marcus ever told Daniel about the renovation. Daniel sat back. Rachel saw his expression. What? Daniel handed her the paper. She read it. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. Then she looked at him. Did Marcus tell you about this? Daniel shook his head. No. Are you sure? Yes. Rachel put the document down. Then don't confront him yet. Daniel frowned. Why? Because you don't know everything. He nodded. She was right. Again. Daniel had spent years reacting emotionally. Now he was learning to investigate before reacting. He made copies. He organized the documents. He wrote down questions. Then he contacted a professional who could explain the legal implications. Not because he wanted to attack his family, because he wanted to understand what was happening. And what he learned 2 days later changed everything. The document wasn't simply a renovation agreement. It could potentially transfer control of part of the property. Daniel stared at the explanation. His first thought wasn't anger. It was disbelief. His second was fear. And his third was Rachel. He remembered her telling him, "You don't need to choose me. You need to choose honesty." Daniel finally understood why she had said it. Because honesty wasn't always comfortable. Sometimes, honesty meant discovering that the people you trusted had made decisions without you. Sometimes, it meant admitting that your own habits had helped them do it. And sometimes, it meant realizing that the person you had spent years trying not to disappoint had never been as afraid of losing you as you were of disappointing them. Daniel closed the folder. He looked at Rachel. I think there's something they didn't tell me. Rachel didn't celebrate. She didn't say, I told you so. She simply asked, do you want to know the truth? Daniel nodded. Yes. Then keep looking. And that was exactly what Daniel did, because the next secret he uncovered wouldn't simply change his opinion of Marcus. It would force him to question whether the family story he'd believed all his life was ever completely true. Daniel spent the next 3 days doing something he had never been very good at. He waited. Not because he was afraid, because for once, he understood that reacting quickly could make things worse. He kept the documents in a locked drawer at work. Every morning, he looked at the folder. Every afternoon, he told himself he would deal with it after work. And every evening, he brought the folder home. Rachel never asked to see it again. That surprised him. She could have said, what did you find? She could have pushed him to confront Marcus. She could have reminded him that she had warned him. Instead, she let him decide what to do. That was Rachel. She didn't need to control the situation to prove she cared about him. She trusted him to handle his own responsibilities. And that trust made Daniel want to become more responsible. On Thursday morning, Daniel finally sat across from an attorney recommended by a colleague. His name was Robert Hayes. Robert was in his early 50s, soft-spoken, and almost frustratingly calm. He examined the documents without making assumptions. He asked questions. Where had Daniel gotten them? Who had prepared them? Who had requested the changes? Had Daniel signed anything? Daniel answered carefully. No. Robert looked up. Good. Daniel frowned. That's all? For now. Robert returned to the documents. Daniel waited. After several minutes, the attorney pointed to a paragraph. This is the part you should be concerned about. Daniel leaned forward. What does it mean? It means that if you sign this agreement as written, you're not simply approving renovations. Daniel's stomach tightened. What am I approving? You're potentially transferring certain rights connected to the property. Daniel stared at the page. Who, Marcus? Robert didn't answer immediately. Not exactly. What does that mean? It means the structure would give another party considerable control. Daniel looked at the document again. Who? Robert explained. Daniel listened. The details became increasingly complicated. Financing, control, liability, management rights, potential obligations. By the time the meeting ended, Daniel had filled nearly 3 pages of notes. As he stood to leave, Robert said, Mr. Mercer, there's something else. Daniel stopped. What? If you haven't signed anything, don't sign anything until you fully understand your position. Daniel nodded. I won't. And don't make decisions based on what you think your family expects. Daniel looked at him. Why? Because family disagreements are emotional. Contracts aren't. Daniel gave a nervous laugh. What happens if they say I'm betraying them? Robert's expression remained calm. Then you can remind them that understanding a contract isn't betrayal. Daniel walked out of the office feeling strangely lighter. For the first time, he had facts. Not accusation, not assumptions. Facts. But facts created another problem. He now had to confront Marcus. That evening, Daniel called his brother. Marcus answered immediately. What? Daniel sat at the kitchen table. We need to talk. About what? The property agreement. Marcus sighed. Daniel, we've already talked about this. Oh. Daniel opened the folder. We haven't. There was silence. Daniel continued. I had the documents reviewed. Marcus's voice changed. Reviewed by who? An attorney. Why? Because I needed to understand what I was being asked to sign. Marcus became angry. You actually got a lawyer involved? Not for a lawsuit. Not yet. Daniel ignored the comment. There are provisions in the agreement you never mentioned. What provisions? Daniel named them. Marcus didn't answer. Marcus. I'm not discussing legal documents over the phone. Why not? Because you already decided what you think. Daniel frowned. No, that's the problem. I didn't know what to think. So I asked someone who understands this. Marcus laughed. Rachel's proud of you, I'm sure. Daniel closed his eyes. Leave her out of this. She is in this. Oh. Daniel's voice became firmer. This is between you and me. Marcus went quiet. Then he said, You know what your problem is? Daniel waited. You've started believing you're smarter than everyone. Daniel shook his head. No. You have. No, Marcus. Daniel looked at the folder. I'm starting to believe I'm responsible for my own decisions. Marcus didn't respond. Daniel continued. If you can explain why these clauses are there, I'll listen. They're standard. Robert said they're significant. Who's Robert? My attorney. Marcus laughed again. So, you have an attorney now. Someone the first consulted. Same thing? No, it isn't. Marcus became silent. Daniel waited. Finally, Marcus said, You really don't trust me. Daniel took a breath. I trust you enough to hear your explanation. And if I don't give you one, then I won't sign. The silence, afterward, was longer. Then Marcus said, You're making a mistake. Daniel replied, Maybe. He ended the call. This time, he didn't shake. He didn't feel guilty. He felt sad. There was a difference. The next morning, Elaine called. Daniel answered. Hi, Mom. Your brother says you've hired a lawyer. Daniel sighed. I consulted one. Why? Because I had questions. You could have asked us. I did. His mother became quiet. Daniel, you know your brother has always looked out for you. I know. Then why are you treating him like an enemy? I'm not. You're acting like it. Daniel looked out his office window. Mom, I found something in the documents. What? I'd rather explain it in person. There's nothing to explain. Daniel frowned. How do you know? Because Marcus told me what happened. That sentence bothered him. Not because Marcus had spoken to their mother, because his mother sounded certain before Daniel had even explained his side. Mom, he said carefully, would you be willing to look at the documents yourself? Silence. Then, I don't need to. Daniel closed his eyes. Why? Because I trust your brother. Daniel sat back. The irony was almost painful. His mother had just said the exact thing Marcus had accused Daniel of failing to do. Trust. But Daniel realized something. His mother wasn't necessarily saying Marcus was right. She was saying she was emotionally committed to believing he was right. And those were different things. Mom, Daniel said. Trust doesn't mean you stop asking questions. She sighed. You sound just like Rachel. Daniel smiled sadly. Maybe that's not a bad thing. His mother hung up. Daniel stared at the phone. For several minutes, he didn't move. Then he noticed an email notification. It was from Robert. Subject: additional property records. There were several attachments. One was an old property filing. Another was a financial statement. The third was a copy of a document Daniel had never seen before. He opened it. His eyes stopped on the date. The document had been prepared months earlier, before Marcus had ever told Daniel about the renovation. Daniel read the first page. Then the second. His breathing slowed. There it was. The piece that had been missing. Someone had already begun arranging the property's future without Daniel's participation, and one signature appeared repeatedly throughout the paperwork. Marcus's. Daniel sat back. He wasn't angry yet. He was trying to understand. Why would his brother do this? What had he been planning? And why had their mother apparently known nothing, or chosen not to tell him? Daniel printed everything. He placed the pages in a folder. Then he called Rachel. She answered while driving to work. Hey! I found something. Her voice immediately changed. What? Documents prepared months ago. About the property? Yes. What do they show? Daniel looked at the pages. I don't know yet. Then don't guess. Daniel smiled. You're getting good at that. At what? Stopping me from jumping to conclusions. Rachel laughed. Years of practice. Daniel's expression softened. Rachel, yeah. Thank you. For what? For not telling me what to do. She was quiet. Then she said, I married you because I trust you. Daniel swallowed. That sentence affected him more than he expected, because he was beginning to understand that trust wasn't something Rachel demanded. She gave it, and he had to decide what kind of man he would be with it. That evening, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and spread the documents out. Rachel sat across from him. Neither touched the papers at first. Daniel explained everything. The attorney, the clauses, the earlier documents, the ownership issue. Rachel listened. When he finished, she asked, Are you sure these are authentic? Daniel nodded. Robert verified them. Then what do you want to do? Daniel looked at her. I want to ask Marcus why. Rachel nodded. Good. Daniel frowned. That's it? That's it. You don't think I should confront him? I think you should talk to him. What if he lies? Then you'll have learned something. Daniel looked down. What if Mom knew? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Then you'll have another conversation. Daniel sighed. This is exhausting. Rachel reached across the table. I know. Daniel looked at her hand. She didn't squeeze it. She didn't pull him closer. She simply left it there. An invitation, not an instruction. Daniel took her hand. I don't want to lose my family. Rachel looked directly at him. Then don't. He frowned. What? Don't lose them. But what if they walk away? Rachel's voice was gentle. Then you can't control that. Daniel looked down. She continued. But don't abandon yourself just to keep people close. Those words settled into him. And for the first time, Daniel understood what his marriage had really been teaching him. Love wasn't supposed to make him smaller. It was supposed to give him enough security to become more honest. The next afternoon, Marcus showed up at Daniel's office without calling. He walked through the door carrying a folder. Daniel looked up. What are you doing here? Marcus placed the folder on the desk. We need to talk. Daniel stared at him. Okay. Marcus sat down. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Marcus said, I know what the attorney told you. Daniel's eyes narrowed. How? Marcus looked away. Because I know what was filed. Daniel felt a cold sensation move through his stomach. Then you knew about the documents. Marcus didn't answer. Daniel leaned forward. How long? Marcus finally looked at him. Long enough. Daniel stared at his brother. And in that moment, the problem stopped being about a property. It became something much more painful. A question of trust. Because Daniel had spent his entire life believing that Marcus might pressure him, might manipulate him, might even frustrate him. But he had never imagined that Marcus could make a major decision involving their father's property without telling him. Marcus opened the folder. Before you judge me, there's something you need to know. Daniel waited. Marcus slid one document across the desk. Daniel looked down. And what he read made him realize that the property dispute was only the beginning. There was another person involved. Someone neither Daniel nor Rachel had expected. And that person had a connection to their father's past that could change everything. Daniel looked at the document again. Then, at Marcus. Who is this? Marcus didn't answer immediately. The name printed near the bottom of the page meant nothing to Daniel. Evelyn Carter. Daniel shook his head. I've never heard of her. Marcus leaned back. I know. Then why is her name on Dad's property documents? Marcus rubbed his palms together. Because Dad knew her. Daniel stared at him. What does that have to do with the property? Everything. Daniel's stomach tightened. For years, their father had been a quiet subject in the Mercer household. After his death, they remembered him in fragments. His laugh, his old truck, the way he made pancakes on Sunday mornings, the baseball glove, the rental property. But there had always been parts of his life the family didn't discuss. Daniel had assumed those parts were ordinary adult problems, financial mistakes, old arguments, things that didn't matter anymore. Now he wasn't so sure. Who is Evelyn? Daniel asked. Marcus looked toward the window. She was your father's business partner. Daniel frowned. Business partner? Years ago. Why have I never heard about her? Because Mom didn't want you to. Daniel stared at him. Why? Marcus sighed. Because she and Dad had a disagreement. About what? The property. Daniel leaned forward. So, this has nothing to do with the renovation. Marcus looked at him. It started long before the renovation. Daniel sat back. For a moment, the room felt too small. You knew? Some of it. How much? Marcus hesitated. Enough to know that Dad didn't own the property the way we always thought he did. Daniel's expression hardened. What does that mean? Marcus pushed the document toward him. Read it. Daniel did. The language was complicated, but one thing was clear. Years before Daniel's father died, the property had been connected to an agreement involving Evelyn Carter. She had contributed money toward its purchase. In exchange, she had retained certain rights. Daniel looked up. So, Dad couldn't just leave the whole thing to us. Marcus shook his head. Not exactly. Then why did his will say? Because Dad believed the agreement had been settled. Daniel frowned. Had it? Marcus looked away. No. The room went silent. Daniel slowly placed the document on the desk. Then why did you try to refinance the property? Marcus didn't answer. Marcus, I thought I could fix it. How? Marcus rubbed his face. By buying out her interest. Daniel stared at him. With what money? The financing. And my signature? Marcus said nothing. Daniel understood. The anger came slowly. Not explosive. Not loud. Worse. Controlled. You needed me to sign because you couldn't do it alone. Marcus nodded. Yes. And you knew that? Yes. And you never told me. Marcus looked at him. I was trying to protect the family. Daniel laughed once. There was no humor in it. From what? From losing Dad's property. Daniel stood. You weren't protecting the family. Marcus stood too. I was trying to save something that mattered. You made a decision involving my name without telling me. I hadn't signed anything. You were preparing documents that required my signature. I knew you'd eventually agree. Daniel stared at him. That sentence hurt more than anything else. Not because Marcus had expected agreement, because he had expected it without needing to ask. Daniel walked toward the window. That's the problem. Marcus frowned. What? You never thought you needed my permission. Marcus became defensive. Because we're brothers. Daniel turned around. Exactly. He pointed toward the document. You used being my brother as a substitute for asking me. Marcus's expression changed. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus said, I didn't want you dragged into this. Daniel looked at him. You dragged me into it when you put my name on the paperwork. Marcus lowered his voice. I was scared. That stopped Daniel. Marcus rarely admitted fear. He had always been the confident one, the fixer, the older brother who knew what to do. Daniel waited. Marcus continued. After Dad died, Mom couldn't handle everything. I took care of the property. I dealt with Evelyn. I handled the taxes. I kept the place running. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. No, you don't. Marcus looked exhausted. You don't know what it was like. Daniel didn't interrupt. Marcus sat down. When Dad died, everyone looked at me. He stared at the floor. Mom looked at me. You looked at me. The relatives looked at me. Everybody expected me to know what to do. Daniel's anger softened slightly. Not disappeared, but softened. Marcus continued. I made mistakes. Daniel sat down across from him. What kind? I didn't tell Mom about the agreement with Evelyn. Why? Because I thought I could settle it. And then? I couldn't. Marcus looked at the document. Years passed. Daniel understood. A secret had become a problem. The problem had become a responsibility. The responsibility had become fear. And fear had eventually become deception. Daniel asked quietly, Why didn't you tell me? Marcus looked at him. Because I knew you'd want to stop. Daniel almost smiled. You're right. I didn't want to lose the property. Daniel shook his head. You should have trusted me enough to tell me. Marcus looked away. The irony was painful. They had spent days arguing about trust. Yet neither brother had truly trusted the other. Marcus didn't trust Daniel to support him. Daniel didn't trust Marcus to tell him everything. And their mother had trusted silence to keep the family together. Everyone had been protecting something, and everyone had made the problem worse. That evening, Daniel told Rachel everything. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she leaned back. So, Marcus wasn't trying to steal the property? Oh. He was trying to solve a problem he was afraid to admit existed. Yes. But he still hid it. Yes. Rachel nodded. Both things can be true. Daniel looked at her. What do you mean? Someone can be afraid and still make a bad decision. Daniel nodded. Marcus isn't innocent. No. But he's not the monster I imagined either. Rachel looked at him. People rarely are. Daniel sighed. I don't know what to do. Rachel didn't immediately answer. Then she asked, what would you do if Marcus weren't your brother? Daniel thought about it. I'd tell him to stop. Why? Because the situation is too complicated. And if he were a client? I'd tell him to disclose everything. And if he were a stranger? Same thing. Rachel nodded. So, what changes, because he's your brother? Daniel looked down. Emotion. Exactly. She reached for her water. Emotion matters. But it shouldn't erase judgment. Daniel sat quietly. Then he said, I think I need to meet Evelyn. Rachel looked at him. With your attorney? Yes. Good. Daniel smiled. You always say that. Because you keep making reasonable decisions. That sounds almost like praise. It is. He laughed. For the first time in days, the tension in his shoulders loosened. But the relief didn't last. The next morning, Daniel's mother called. Your brother told me everything. Daniel sat at his desk. Everything? He told me about Evelyn. Daniel waited. His mother sighed. I wanted to protect you. Daniel closed his eyes. Mom, that's what everyone keeps saying. What? That they were protecting me. Silence. Your father made mistakes, Elaine said. I know. He thought the issue was settled. It wasn't. I know that now. Daniel swallowed. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid. Of what? Losing both my sons. Daniel looked down. Mom, you didn't lose me because I asked questions. I know. You almost lost my trust because you didn't tell me the truth. His mother began crying. Daniel's chest tightened. He hated hearing her cry. The old instinct returned. Apologize. Take responsibility for her emotions. Make it better. But this time, Daniel didn't rush to rescue her from the discomfort. He waited. Finally, Elaine said, I don't know how to fix this. Daniel's voice softened. Neither do I. That was the most honest answer he could give. But we can stop making it worse. His mother cried quietly. Will you still come Sunday? Daniel hesitated. Yes. Thank you. But, Mom. Yes? I won't discuss signing anything. She understood. Okay. Daniel ended the call. He sat in silence. For the first time he realized boundaries didn't always have to sound harsh. Sometimes they were simply clear. Sunday arrived. Daniel, Rachel, Elaine and Marcus sat around the same dining table where the original paperwork had been presented. No consultant this time. No folders spread across the table. Just family. The atmosphere was uncomfortable. Marcus looked tired. Elaine looked older. Rachel remained quiet. Daniel finally spoke. I met with an attorney. Marcus nodded. I know. I also want to meet Evelyn. Marcus swallowed. She'll be difficult. Maybe. She wants money. Maybe. Marcus looked frustrated. You don't understand. Daniel leaned forward. Then explain it to me. Marcus stared at him. For the first time, there was no accusation in Daniel's voice. Only a request. Explain. Marcus began talking. Slowly. Honestly. He explained the history of the property. The agreement. The money. The mistakes. The promises. The things their father had said. The things Marcus had assumed. The things he should have told them years ago. By the time he finished, nearly an hour had passed. Nobody had interrupted him. Daniel looked at his brother. I wish you'd told me this from the beginning. Marcus nodded. I know. I still can't sign anything until everything is verified. I understand. Daniel looked at his mother. And I won't let anyone pressure Rachel because she's my wife. Elaine lowered her eyes. I understand. Rachel finally spoke. I don't want this family divided. Marcus looked at her. Then what do you want? Rachel answered calmly. The same thing Daniel wants. What? The truth. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel realized something. The secret had finally been revealed. But the revelation hadn't solved anything. It had only given them the information they needed to make better choices. And that was how real life worked. Knowing the truth didn't automatically make decisions easy. It simply made it harder to pretend you didn't know. Daniel reached for Rachel's hand beneath the table. She squeezed his fingers once, not as a victory, as reassurance, because the hardest choice was still ahead. Daniel would have to decide whether to protect his family from the consequences of their past, or allow the truth to take its course. And if he chose the truth, he knew exactly what it might cost him. His family might never forgive him. But for the first time, Daniel understood something even more important. He couldn't build a healthy marriage by asking Rachel to trust a man who was unwilling to trust himself. And the next decision would test everything he had learned. For 3 weeks, Daniel tried to believe that honesty had solved the problem. It hadn't. It had only made the problem visible. The family now knew about Evelyn Carter's claim to the property. Marcus had stopped pretending everything was simple. Elaine had stopped insisting Daniel sign immediately. And Daniel had stopped allowing himself to believe that avoiding the issue would make it disappear. But none of that meant the situation was peaceful. In fact, the opposite was true. The more everyone learned, the more complicated everything became. Evelyn's attorney sent another letter, then another. Marcus insisted that the property could still be saved. Daniel's attorney advised caution. Elaine wanted her sons to reach an agreement without going to court. Rachel wanted Daniel to make sure that whatever decision he made was one he could defend to himself later. And somewhere in the middle of all of it stood Daniel. For the first time in his life, everyone wanted something from him. His mother wanted family unity. His brother wanted support. The attorneys wanted facts. Rachel wanted honesty. And Daniel wanted something that seemed increasingly difficult to obtain. Peace. But he was beginning to understand that peace and silence were not the same thing. One Saturday morning, Daniel sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. Rachel came outside carrying a blanket. You look like you're trying to solve the universe. Daniel smiled. Just the Mercer family. That's worse. He laughed. She sat beside him. For several minutes, they listened to birds moving through the trees. Then Daniel said, Do you ever regret marrying me? Rachel turned toward him. What? You heard me. She studied his face. Where did that come from? I don't know. Rachel pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Do you regret marrying me? No. Then why would I regret marrying you? Because of all this. She looked toward the yard. Your family isn't our marriage. I know. Do you? Daniel looked at her. Rachel continued. Because sometimes it feels like you bring their problems home and then punish yourself for not fixing them. Daniel looked down at his coffee. I feel responsible. You can care without being responsible for every outcome. He nodded. I know. Do you? He smiled. You've been waiting to use that. I have. They laughed. Then Rachel became serious. Daniel, I need you to understand something. What? I don't want to be the reason you lose your family. You aren't, I know. She looked at him. But if you choose to protect them from the truth because you're afraid they'll blame me, that will eventually hurt us. Daniel swallowed. She was right. Again. He had spent so much time worrying about what his family thought of Rachel that he had failed to ask what Rachel needed from him. Not obedience. Not victory. Clarity. I'll tell the truth, he said. Rachel nodded. Even if it costs you. Daniel looked at her. I don't know. That's honest. He smiled faintly. But I'm going to try. Rachel reached over and took his hand. 2 days later, Marcus asked Daniel to meet him at the property. Daniel agreed. When he arrived, Marcus was standing outside the old rental house. The building looked worse than Daniel remembered. The paint had peeled near the windows. One side of the porch sagged slightly. The yard was overgrown. Marcus looked around. Your father loved this place. Daniel nodded. He did. He always said we'd fix it up someday. Daniel looked at him. Maybe that's why you're so determined. Marcus didn't answer. They walked inside. The smell of dust and old wood filled the rooms. Marcus stopped in the living room. I remember when Dad brought us here. Daniel smiled. I was 6. You were annoying. I was 6. You were still annoying. Daniel laughed. For a moment, they were brothers again. Not opposing sides. Not people with lawyers. Just 2 sons standing inside a building their father had once cared about. Then Marcus said, I want you to know something. Daniel waited. I never wanted you to get hurt. Daniel nodded. I believe you. Marcus looked surprised. You do? Yes. But Daniel looked around the room. But you still made decisions you had no right to make for me. Marcus lowered his eyes. I know. I can understand why you did it. Marcus looked up. Really? Yes. Daniel paused. But understanding isn't the same as approving. Marcus nodded. I know. They stood quietly. Then Marcus said, if we lose the property, Mom will never forgive me. Daniel frowned. Why do you think it's your job to save her from that? Marcus looked at him. Because I'm her son. Daniel almost smiled. That's what I've been saying my whole life. Marcus looked away. Daniel continued. Maybe we've both been doing the same thing. What? Trying to protect Mom from reality. Marcus stared at him. Maybe. Daniel realized something. His brother wasn't simply controlling. He was afraid. Fear didn't excuse his decisions, but it explained them, and understanding the reason behind someone's behavior could help you respond without becoming cruel. Daniel had learned that from Rachel. He had also learned something else. Compassion without boundaries could become another form of enabling. That afternoon, Marcus received a call. He answered. His expression changed. Daniel watched him. What happened? Marcus ended the call. They're filing. Daniel's stomach tightened. Who? Evelyn. When? Monday. Daniel took a breath. So it's happening. Marcus nodded. I guess it is. They stood in silence. Then Marcus looked at Daniel. When they ask you questions, you need to tell them you support the family. Daniel didn't respond. Marcus continued. You don't have to lie. Marcus. Just don't say anything that hurts us. Daniel looked at him. What if the truth hurts you? Marcus stared at him. Then maybe you don't understand what family means. Daniel felt the old pressure returning. The same pressure, different room, same expectation. Be loyal. Keep quiet. Protect the family. Don't make things worse. Daniel looked toward the window. For a moment, he considered saying yes. It would be easier. If he supported Marcus publicly, perhaps the case would end faster. Perhaps his mother would stop crying. Perhaps his family would forgive him. Perhaps everything would return to normal. But then he remembered what normal had cost him. Years of silence, unspoken resentment, a marriage forced to absorb family pressure, decisions made without him. Daniel turned back toward Marcus. I understand what family means. Marcus waited. It means I don't lie for you. Marcus's face fell. Daniel, no. Daniel's voice remained calm. I won't lie for you. Marcus stared at him. You're choosing Rachel. Daniel shook his head. Oh. He paused. I'm choosing the truth. Marcus turned away. Daniel felt something break between them. Not completely, but enough to hurt. That night, Daniel barely slept. At 2 a.m, he went downstairs. He found Rachel sitting at the kitchen table. She was drinking water. You can't sleep either? She shook her head. No. Daniel sat across from her. I told Marcus I won't lie. Rachel nodded. How do you feel? Available. She smiled gently. Good. Daniel frowned. Good? Not because you feel terrible. She reached across the table. Because doing the right thing isn't always comfortable. Daniel looked down. I keep thinking about Mom. I know. What if she never forgives me? Rachel was quiet. Then she said, you can't control whether she forgives you. Daniel nodded. But you can control whether you give her a reason to stop trusting you. He looked at her. What do you mean? Tell the truth. Daniel took a slow breath. Rachel continued. And don't use the truth as a weapon. Daniel understood. He didn't have to destroy Marcus. He didn't have to embarrass his mother. He didn't have to make himself the hero. He simply had to tell the truth. That was all. But sometimes, the simplest responsibility was the hardest one to carry. Monday morning arrived. Daniel entered the courthouse with Rachel beside him. Marcus was already there. Elaine sat behind him. When she saw Daniel, her expression changed. Daniel stopped. For a moment, he considered walking over. Then, he did. Mom. She looked at him. I wish you weren't doing this. Daniel nodded. I know. Your father would be heartbroken. Daniel swallowed. Maybe. She looked at Rachel. She doesn't understand what this family means. Rachel remained silent. Daniel stepped between them. Mom, please don't do this. Do what? Make Rachel responsible for my decision. Elaine looked away. I just don't understand you anymore. Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes. I don't think I understood myself before. His mother looked at him. What changed? Daniel glanced at Rachel, then back at his mother. I started asking myself whether I was doing things because I believed they were right, or because I was afraid of disappointing you. Elaine's expression softened, but she didn't answer. The bailiff called everyone into the courtroom. Daniel took Rachel's hand. Not because he needed her to make the decision. Because he was grateful she was there while he made it himself. As they entered the courtroom, Daniel saw Marcus watching him. His brother looked afraid, and Daniel realized that fear was contagious. His family was afraid of losing the property. Marcus was afraid of being exposed. His mother was afraid of losing her sons. Daniel was afraid of losing his family. But there was one fear he no longer wanted to obey. The fear of telling the truth. Because once a person spends enough years avoiding consequences, eventually the consequences become unavoidable. And Daniel was about to discover exactly what honesty would cost him. The courtroom was colder than Daniel expected. Not physically, emotionally. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. The shuffle of papers, the scrape of a chair, the quiet cough from somewhere behind him. Daniel sat beside Rachel. Across the room, Marcus sat next to their mother. For years, Daniel had imagined family gatherings around that same kind of table. Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, his mother's Sunday dinners. He had never imagined sitting across from his brother while attorneys discussed their father's property. It felt unreal. Yet there they were, and there was no way to pretend anymore. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the proceedings began. Daniel listened as the attorneys discussed the history of the property. Evelyn Carter's claim, the original agreement, the later documents, Marcus's attempts to refinance the property, the disagreement over ownership. Every detail seemed to expose another layer of the family's past. Daniel occasionally looked at his mother. She kept her eyes down. Marcus looked straight ahead. Rachel sat quietly beside Daniel. She didn't whisper advice. She didn't tell him what to say. She simply stayed. That mattered more than he expected. Because Daniel had spent his entire life believing that when people loved you, they needed to protect you from difficult moments. Rachel had taught him something different. Sometimes love simply means refusing to leave when the difficult moment arrives. During a break, Daniel stepped into the hallway. Marcus followed him. Daniel turned. What? Marcus looked exhausted. I need to talk to you. Okay. Marcus glanced around. Not here. They walked toward the end of the hallway. Marcus lowered his voice. Are you really going to testify? Daniel nodded. If I'm called. And you're going to tell them everything? Daniel didn't answer immediately. I'm going to answer honestly. Marcus looked away. You know what that means. Yes. Mom can't handle this. Daniel sighed. Marcus, I know. Then help me. Daniel looked at his brother. How? Tell them the property was always meant to stay in the family. That isn't what they're asking. They'll understand the intention. Intent doesn't change the documents. Marcus's face tightened. You've become cold. Daniel shook his head. Oh. He looked directly at him. I'm trying not to become dishonest. Marcus stared at him. You really think you're better than me now? No. Then why are you doing this? Daniel took a breath. Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering whether I protected you or just protected myself from disappointing you. Marcus looked down. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Marcus said something Daniel didn't expect. I was scared. Daniel's expression softened. I know. No, you don't. Marcus swallowed. I thought if I admitted I had made a mistake, Mom would lose everything. Daniel listened. I thought I could fix it before anyone knew. How long? Marcus hesitated. Years. Daniel closed his eyes. Years. That word carried weight. Years of hiding. Years of postponing. Years of hoping the problem would somehow solve itself. Daniel finally said, You should have told me. I know. I could have helped. Marcus laughed bitterly. You would have told me to stop. Yes. Exactly. Daniel looked at him. Maybe stopping was what you needed. Marcus nodded. I know that now. The bailiff called for everyone to return. Marcus started walking away. Then he stopped. Daniel? Yeah? If they ask you whether I acted alone. Daniel waited. Marcus looked at him. Don't protect me. Daniel's eyes widened. Marcus turned away before Daniel could respond. For the first time, Daniel realized that his brother might finally understand what accountability meant. When the hearing resumed, Daniel was called. He walked toward the witness stand. His legs felt heavier than usual. He raised his right hand. He swore to tell the truth. Those words sounded almost ordinary, but they weren't. For Daniel, they represented years of unfinished conversations. He sat down. The attorney began with simple questions. His name, his relationship to the property, his relationship to Marcus, his relationship to Rachel. Then the questions became more specific. Mr. Mercer, were you aware of the agreement involving Evelyn Carter? Not initially. When did you learn about it? Recently. Did your brother inform you? No. Did you authorize him to prepare documents involving your interest in the property? No. Did you sign any documents transferring your rights? No. The attorney nodded. Then came the question Daniel had feared. Did your wife influence your decision to refuse the agreement? Daniel looked toward Rachel. She was sitting quietly. Her expression didn't tell him what to say. It simply reminded him that she had never asked him to say anything. He looked back at the attorney. No. Are you sure? Yes. Then why did you refuse? Daniel took a breath. Because I didn't understand what I was being asked to sign. The attorney paused. Did your wife tell you to consult an attorney? Daniel considered the wording. She encouraged me to understand the documents before making a decision. So she influenced you? Daniel shook his head. She encouraged me to think. The attorney looked at him. Isn't that the same thing? Oh. Daniel's voice was calm. She didn't tell me what decision to make. What did she tell you? Daniel looked at Rachel again. Then he answered. She told me that if something involved both of us, I owed her honesty. The courtroom became quiet. The attorney continued. And did she tell you to testify against your brother? Oh. Did she ask you to protect her? Oh. Then what did she ask you to do? Daniel took a breath. Tell the truth. The attorney studied him. Mr. Mercer, do you trust your wife? Daniel looked toward Rachel, then toward his mother. Then Marcus. He remembered the kitchen table, the property documents, the countless ordinary moments. Rachel paying bills while he worked late. Rachel admitting when she was wrong. Rachel disagreeing without insulting him. Rachel refusing to tell him what to do. Rachel standing beside him without demanding that he stand against anyone else. Then Daniel answered, Yes. The attorney asked, Why? Daniel swallowed. Because she's given me reasons to. The attorney waited. Daniel continued. She doesn't always agree with me. Sometimes she's wrong, sometimes I'm wrong. But she has never asked me to lie for her. Rachel lowered her eyes. Daniel looked toward the judge, then back at the attorney. And when I was afraid of making a decision, she didn't make it for me. His voice became steadier. She told me to make the decision myself. The attorney paused, then asked, So when your family says your wife turned you against them, what do you say? Daniel looked at his mother. His mother's eyes were wet. He looked at Marcus. His brother's face was expressionless. Then Daniel answered, My wife didn't turn me against my family. He took a breath. I started asking questions. The words seemed to hang in the room. After the testimony ended, Daniel returned to his seat. Rachel leaned toward him. You okay? Daniel nodded. I think so. You did well. Daniel smiled. I didn't feel like I did. That's usually how hard things feel. He looked at her. Thank you. Rachel squeezed his hand. Across the room, Elaine watched them. For the first time, she seemed to understand something. Rachel wasn't trying to take Daniel away. She wasn't trying to replace his family. She wasn't controlling him. She had simply given him permission to become an adult inside his own family. Outside the courthouse, Elaine approached Daniel. Rachel stood a few steps away. Elaine looked at her son. You really trust her? Daniel nodded. Yes. His mother wiped her eyes. I thought trusting her meant you stopped trusting us. Daniel shook his head. No. He paused. I think I confused trust with obedience. Elaine looked at him. Daniel continued. For a long time, I thought being a good son meant making sure you were never disappointed in me. His mother's face tightened. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know. Then why did you? Daniel looked at her. Because I was afraid. She nodded slowly. Maybe I taught you that without realizing it. Daniel felt tears in his eyes. Maybe. They stood quietly. Then Elaine said, Your father would have been proud of you. Daniel looked away. Even if I don't protect Marcus. His mother hesitated. Then said, Maybe protecting him means letting him face what he did. Daniel looked at her. That was the first time his mother had ever said anything like that. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a beginning. That evening, Daniel and Rachel drove home in silence. The hearing had taken hours. Daniel was exhausted. When they arrived, he sat in the driveway for a moment before turning off the engine. Rachel looked at him. What are you thinking? Daniel smiled faintly. About the first night you told me I didn't have to make everyone happy. Rachel laughed. I don't remember saying it like that. You did. Probably. Daniel turned toward her. I think I've spent my whole life thinking love means preventing people from being disappointed. Rachel looked at him. What do you think now? Daniel thought carefully. I think love means being honest enough to let people make their own choices. Rachel nodded, and accepting that some of those choices may hurt. Yeah. She reached for his hand. That's harder. Much harder. They sat, quietly. Then Daniel said, I'm sorry. Rachel looked at him. For what? For making you carry the consequences of my fear. Rachel's expression softened. You don't have to punish yourself forever. I'm not. He smiled. I'm just admitting I was wrong. Rachel nodded. That's enough. Daniel leaned back. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. Not because the case was over. It wasn't. Not because his family had forgiven him. They hadn't. Not because the property problem was solved. It wasn't. He felt peace because he had finally stopped fighting himself. He knew what he believed. He knew what he needed to do. And he knew that whatever happened next, he could face it without pretending. The following morning, Daniel received an email from his attorney. The evidence had raised additional questions about the financing arrangements. There would likely be another hearing. More testimony. More documents. More pressure. Daniel read the message twice. Then he closed his laptop. Rachel was making coffee. He walked into the kitchen. More court. She looked at him. Okay. Daniel smiled. That's it? Rachel handed him a cup. One problem at a time. Daniel took it. He laughed. You're getting annoyingly good at this. I've had a good teacher. Who? You. Daniel looked at her. Me? Yes. She smiled. You taught me that avoiding problems doesn't make them disappear. Daniel shook his head. I think you taught me that. Maybe. They smiled at each other, but neither knew what the next hearing would reveal, because the evidence Marcus had hidden wasn't the only secret connected to their father's property. And when that final piece of information came to light, Daniel would have to decide whether he could forgive his brother, without surrendering the boundaries he had fought so hard to build. The courtroom had heard Daniel's truth. Now his family would have to decide what to do with it. If Daniel's journey has taught us anything so far, it's that telling the truth isn't always the easiest choice, but sometimes it's the only choice that allows you to respect yourself afterward. Daniel stood in court and refused to lie for his family. But now the consequences of that decision are becoming real. So tell me in the comments. If you were Daniel, would you tell the truth even if it meant hurting someone you loved? Or would you protect your family to keep the peace? There is no easy answer. If this story is touching your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more stories about love, trust, family, and the choices that shape our lives. And don't go anywhere, because Daniel's biggest decision may already be behind him, but the consequences of telling the truth are only beginning. Chapter 5 is where everything changes. The second hearing began 3 weeks later. By then, Daniel had stopped expecting the courtroom to feel normal. It never did. Every time he walked through those doors, he felt as though he was stepping into a version of his family that nobody had wanted to acknowledge. The version where love existed alongside resentment, where good intentions could produce terrible decisions, where people could genuinely believe they were protecting one another while quietly damaging the very relationships they claimed to value. Daniel sat beside Rachel. Across the room, Marcus sat with their mother. The relationship between the two brothers had changed since the first hearing. They still spoke, but carefully. No more casual jokes, no more spontaneous phone calls, no more assumptions that the other person would simply understand. Their conversations had become deliberate. Sometimes that felt painful. Other times, Daniel thought it was the healthiest thing that had happened to them. Because before the conflict, they had confused familiarity with communication. They knew each other's habits. They knew each other's history. But they hadn't actually known how to talk honestly. Now they were learning. Slowly. Uncomfortably. But honestly. During the weeks between hearings, Daniel had continued working. His job had become a strange refuge. At work, problems were expected. If a project had a delay, they identified the delay. If a contractor made a mistake, they addressed it. If a budget was wrong, they corrected it. Nobody considered those things personal. A problem was a problem. You didn't have to hate the person who caused it to fix it. That idea had become increasingly important to Daniel, because his family had taught him the opposite. If Marcus made a mistake, questioning it felt like an attack on Marcus. If his mother made an emotional decision, challenging it felt like rejecting her. If Daniel disagreed, the disagreement became evidence that something was wrong with the relationship. Rachel had helped him separate those things. A person could be wrong without being evil. A boundary could exist without hatred. A disagreement could happen without ending love. Daniel had started applying those lessons everywhere. He was calmer at work, more direct, less apologetic. One afternoon, his supervisor had told him, "You've changed." Daniel smiled. "Hopefully for the better. You don't spend 10 minutes explaining yourself anymore." Daniel laughed. "I'm working on it." But there was another change. Daniel had started saying no, not constantly, not aggressively, simply when no was the appropriate answer. And every time he did, he realized something. The world didn't end. People sometimes frowned. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they were disappointed. But eventually, the conversation continued. That discovery was freeing. On the morning of the hearing, Daniel and Rachel sat in their car outside the courthouse. Neither was ready to get out. Rachel looked at him. Nervous? Yes. Good. Daniel laughed. You always say that. Nerves mean you care. Or that I'm terrified. That too. Daniel smiled. Then his expression became serious. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Daniel waited. Finally, she said, I think you're doing the honest thing. Daniel nodded. That's not the same. Oh. She looked at him. Sometimes, doing the honest thing doesn't guarantee the outcome you want. Daniel took a breath. But you trust me. Yes. Even if I make a mistake? Yes. Daniel looked at her. Why? Because trust isn't believing someone will never make mistakes. Rachel smiled. It's believing they'll take responsibility when they do. Daniel stared at her. That was another lesson he would remember. Trust wasn't perfection. It was accountability. Inside the courtroom, the attorneys presented new evidence. Financial records, property records, correspondence, old agreements. The deeper they went, the clearer the pattern became. Marcus had not intended to steal the property. But he had concealed information. He had made decisions without Daniel. He had allowed his fear of losing the property to justify actions that should have required everyone's consent. The judge asked questions. Marcus answered. Daniel listened. At one point, Marcus admitted that he had known about Evelyn's claim for years. The room became silent. Elaine covered her mouth. Daniel closed his eyes. He had suspected it. Hearing Marcus say it aloud was different. After the hearing paused, Daniel found his brother in the hallway. Marcus looked exhausted. Daniel stopped a few feet away. How are you? Marcus gave a humorless laugh. That's what you ask? Daniel shrugged. What should I ask? Marcus looked at him. Whether I'm sorry. Are you? Marcus looked down. Yes. Daniel nodded. Then say it. Marcus stared at him. To you? To whoever deserves to hear it. Marcus swallowed. I should have told you. Daniel waited. I should have told Mom. He looked toward the courtroom. I should have stopped this years ago. Daniel nodded. Yes. Marcus looked at him. You don't have to forgive me. Daniel was quiet. Then he said, I'm not ready. Marcus nodded. I understand. That was the first honest conversation they had had in years. It wasn't warm. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. And sometimes real was enough to begin rebuilding something broken. Later that afternoon, Daniel was called back to the witness stand. The opposing attorney had a different strategy this time. Instead of attacking the documents, he focused on Daniel's marriage. Mr. Mercer, you have described your wife as trustworthy. Yes. You've also said she encouraged you to question your family's decisions. Yes. Would you agree that your wife had a financial interest in the property? Daniel paused. Yes. The attorney leaned forward. So she had a reason to influence you. Daniel looked at him. She had a reason to want the matter handled properly. That's not what I asked. Daniel remained calm. She had a financial interest because we're married. Exactly. The attorney glanced toward the judge. And isn't it true that your wife was unhappy with your family's involvement in your marriage? Daniel frowned. No. She never complained? She complained. A few people smiled. Even the judge seemed amused. Daniel continued. She's my wife. We disagree sometimes. The attorney nodded. So she did influence you? Daniel shook his head. She influenced me the same way I influence her. How? We talk. The attorney waited. Daniel continued. We discuss things. We question each other. We challenge each other's assumptions. But neither of us gets to make the other's decisions. The attorney looked at him. And that's why you trust her? Daniel nodded. Partly. What else? Daniel thought about it. Consistency. The attorney raised an eyebrow. Explain. Daniel took a breath. Rachel has shown me who she is over time. He glanced toward her. When we have money problems, she doesn't hide them. When she makes a mistake, she admits it. When she disagrees with me, she tells me. When she's angry, she doesn't threaten to leave. When she thinks I'm wrong, she says so. Daniel paused. And when I make my own decision, she lets me live with it. The attorney asked, even when she disagrees? Yes. Why? Because she respects me. The attorney studied him, then asked the question. that would become the moment everyone remembered. So, Mr. Mercer, when it comes down to it, whose version do you trust? Daniel looked toward Rachel. He didn't need to think. I trust my wife. The room went completely quiet. The attorney leaned forward. Why? Daniel looked at the judge, then at his mother, then Marcus. Finally, he looked back at Rachel. Because she has never asked me to lie for her. His voice remained steady. She has never told me that loving her meant hating my family. He paused. She has never demanded that I choose her. Daniel swallowed. She only asked me to tell the truth. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Daniel continued. And that is why I trust her. When Daniel stepped down from the witness stand, he felt strangely calm. He hadn't won anything. He hadn't defeated anyone. He had simply said what was true. Rachel met him in the hallway. She smiled. You okay? Daniel nodded. Yeah. She hugged him, then stepped back. Daniel smiled. That was a lot. It was. Did I say too much? Rachel shook her head. You said what you believed. Daniel looked at her. I meant every word. I know. For a moment, they simply stood there. Then Daniel said, You know what scares me? What? That I didn't understand what trust was until all of this happened. Rachel smiled. Sometimes, we don't understand what something means until life makes us prove it. Daniel nodded. He thought about the small decision months earlier. The signature, the questions, the refusal. That one choice had led to another, and another, and another, until eventually he had stood in court and spoken 5 words that seemed simple. I trust my wife. But those 5 words represented years of ordinary choices. Years of honesty. Years of consistency. Years of showing up. That was the secret nobody in his family had understood. Daniel hadn't chosen Rachel because she was his wife. He trusted her because she had earned that trust, and that distinction mattered. That evening, Daniel and Rachel stopped at a small diner before going home. They sat in a booth near the window. Daniel ordered coffee. Rachel ordered tea. Neither talked about the case for several minutes. Finally, Daniel said, Do you think we're going to be okay? Rachel looked at him. Yes. She smiled. We already are. Daniel stared at her. What do you mean? We're sitting here. He smiled. We're eating. Exactly. She took a sip of tea. Life isn't going to stop being complicated. Daniel nodded. But we know how to talk now. He smiled. Mostly. They laughed. Outside, cars moved through the evening traffic. People walked past the window. Ordinary life continued, and Daniel realized something. The courtroom had made everything seem enormous, but the marriage that mattered most to him had never been built in enormous moments. It had been built in diners, kitchens, cars, grocery stores, quiet conversations, arguments that ended with apologies, bills paid together, mistakes admitted, promises kept. Trust was not a speech. It was a pattern, and Daniel had finally learned to recognize it. But the legal battle wasn't over yet. The court still had to determine the final ownership arrangements, and Marcus still had to face the consequences of years of decisions made in fear. Daniel knew there would be pain. He knew his mother might never see things exactly as he did. He knew his relationship with Marcus might never return to what it had been. But he also knew something else. He wasn't going back. Not to silence. Not to automatic obedience. Not to confusing guilt with love. Not to believing that keeping everyone happy was his responsibility. He had learned too much. And the next morning, he would receive the court's final decision. A decision that would determine what happened to the property. But Daniel would soon discover that winning a legal case couldn't automatically repair a family. That part would require something no judge could order. Accountability, forgiveness, boundaries, and a willingness to choose each other honestly. Because sometimes the hardest consequence isn't losing an argument. It's realizing that the people you love must live with the consequences of their own choices. The courtroom emptied slowly after Daniel finished testifying. People stood in small groups. Attorneys gathered papers. A few relatives whispered near the doors. But Daniel remained seated for several minutes. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel relieved. He simply felt tired. Rachel sat beside him. You ready to go? Daniel looked toward his mother. Elaine was still sitting near the front. Marcus stood beside her. They were speaking quietly. Daniel watched them for a moment. Then he looked at Rachel. Not yet. She nodded. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Daniel had spent his whole life believing that when his family was hurting, it was his job to make the pain disappear. But this time, he couldn't. And perhaps he shouldn't. Eventually, Daniel walked toward his mother. Rachel remained behind. Elaine looked up when he approached. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Elaine asked, "Are you happy?" Daniel's heart sank. "No?" She looked surprised. "I thought you wanted the truth." "I did." "Then why aren't you happy?" Daniel sat beside her. "Because the truth doesn't make me happy." Elaine looked down. "It hurts." "I know." She wiped her eyes. "I never wanted this." "I believe you. But you still did it." Daniel nodded. "Yes." His mother looked at him. "How can you say that so calmly?" Daniel thought about it. "Because being angry won't change what happened." Elaine looked toward Marcus. "Your brother made mistakes." "I know. He was trying to protect us." "I know. Then why couldn't you help him?" Daniel took a slow breath. "I tried." Elaine frowned. "You could have supported him." "I did support him." She looked confused. "How?" "By telling him the truth." Elaine stared at him. Daniel continued. "Supporting someone doesn't always mean agreeing with them." He paused. "Sometimes it means telling them when they're making a mistake." His mother lowered her eyes. "I don't know how to be your mother in this situation." Daniel's expression softened. "Then maybe we don't have to solve everything today." She looked at him. "You're still my son?" Daniel smiled sadly. "Of course. Even after all this? Especially after all this." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Daniel reached for her hand. She held it. For a few seconds, they were simply mother and son. Not opposing sides. Not witnesses. Not family members trapped inside a legal dispute. Just two people who loved each other and had made mistakes. Marcus approached them. Elaine released Daniel's hand. Marcus stood silently. Daniel looked up. "What?" Marcus glanced at their mother, then at Daniel. "I owe you an apology." Daniel didn't respond. Marcus continued. "I should have told you about Evelyn." "Yes." "I should never have prepared those documents without you." "Yes." "I thought I could fix everything." Daniel nodded. "I know." Marcus swallowed. "But I made it worse." Daniel looked at his brother. "Yes." Marcus seemed almost surprised that Daniel didn't soften the answer. Then Daniel said, "But admitting it matters." Marcus looked down. "Does it?" "It does." Daniel stood. "But it doesn't erase the consequences." Marcus nodded. "I know." That sentence was new. For years, Marcus had treated consequences as problems to solve. Now he was beginning to understand that some consequences had to be experienced. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not going to lie for you." Marcus nodded. "But I'm not going to destroy you either." Marcus looked at him. "What's the difference?" Daniel answered, "I'll tell the truth. What happens after that is yours to deal with." Marcus looked away. For the first time, Daniel felt that his brother understood. Outside the courthouse, Rachel was waiting. Daniel walked toward her. "How did it go?" "I talked to Mom." Rachel nodded. "And Marcus?" "How was that?" "Hard." Rachel smiled faintly. "Most important conversations are." Daniel looked at her. "Do you ever get tired of being right?" Rachel laughed. "I'm not always right." "You were about this." "Maybe." Daniel shook his head. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "I spent years thinking boundaries meant pushing people away." Rachel listened. "Now I think boundaries tell people how they can stay close." Rachel smiled. "That's a good realization." Daniel took her hand. "I wish I'd understood it earlier." "We understand things when we're ready." Daniel looked at her. "Are you disappointed in me?" Rachel's expression changed. "Oh, even after everything." "I was disappointed in some of your choices." Daniel nodded. "That's different." "Exactly." He smiled. She squeezed his hand. "You're allowed to have been wrong without becoming a bad person." Daniel took a deep breath. That sentence gave him something he hadn't realized he needed. Permission to stop punishing himself. He had made mistakes. He had ignored warning signs. He had allowed family pressure to influence him. He had even become defensive with Rachel. But he had also changed. And change required more than recognizing what you had done wrong. It required behaving differently afterward. The final ruling came 2 weeks later. Daniel and Rachel sat in the courthouse again. This time, Daniel wasn't afraid of what he might have to say. The evidence had established that Marcus had acted without Daniel's informed consent. The court also recognized Evelyn's legitimate interest in the property. The Mercer family would not simply receive everything they had expected. The property would have to be handled according to the legal rights established by the original agreements. There would be financial consequences. The renovation plans would be suspended. Additional negotiations would be required. Daniel's personal liability would be protected because he had never signed the disputed agreement. When the judge finished, Daniel sat quietly. Rachel leaned toward him. "How do you feel?" Daniel thought about it. "Relieved. Anything else?" "Hard." Rachel nodded. "That makes sense." Daniel looked across the room. Marcus was staring at the floor. Elaine was crying quietly. The family had technically won one part of the dispute, but there was no celebration. No smiles, no congratulations. Because Daniel finally understood something important. Sometimes getting justice doesn't feel like winning. Sometimes it simply means the truth has stopped being ignored. Afterward, Daniel and Marcus stood outside the courthouse. Marcus looked at the building. "I lost." Daniel shook his head. "You lost part of what you wanted." Marcus looked at him. "Isn't that the same thing?" "No." Daniel paused. "You still have a chance to fix what you can." Marcus laughed bitterly. "How?" "Start by telling the truth." Marcus looked at him. "To who?" "Everyone." Marcus sighed. "That's going to hurt." "Yes." Daniel looked at him. "But hiding it hurt too." Marcus nodded slowly. "You really believe that?" "I lived it." Marcus looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know how to apologize to Mom. Start with the truth." Marcus smiled faintly. "You're becoming annoying." Daniel laughed. "You taught me." For the first time in months, Marcus smiled. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. That evening, Daniel and Rachel returned home. Daniel changed clothes. Rachel prepared dinner. Neither discussed the court immediately. They moved around the kitchen together. She chopped vegetables. He washed dishes. The rhythm was familiar, comforting, ordinary. Eventually, Daniel said, "Rachel?" "Yeah." "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you ever tell me to leave them?" Rachel stopped chopping. "Because they're your family." "But they hurt you too." "Yes. Didn't you ever want me to choose you?" Rachel looked at him. "Of course. I wanted you to stand beside me." Daniel waited. "But I never wanted you to stand beside me, because I demanded it." She put the knife down. "I wanted you to stand beside me because you understood why." Daniel nodded slowly. Rachel continued. "There's a difference between being chosen and being obeyed." Daniel stared at her. She smiled. "I never wanted a husband who needed permission to think." Daniel felt his eyes sting. He walked around the counter and hugged her. This time, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. The kind of embrace shared by two people who had survived a difficult season together. Rachel rested her head against him. "You okay?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah." "You sure?" "Yeah." He pulled back. "I finally understand something." "What?" "Why you kept telling me to make my own decision." Rachel smiled. "Why?" "Because if you made it for me, I'd never know whether I could trust myself." She looked at him. "And now?" Daniel smiled. "Now I think I can." Later that night, Daniel sat on the back porch. The neighborhood was quiet. A few porch lights glowed across the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Daniel thought about the last several months. The document. The first argument. The attorney. The secret. The courtroom. His mother's tears. Marcus's apology. Rachel's patience. Every decision had led to another. None of it had happened because of one dramatic moment. It had happened because small choices accumulated. A question asked. A signature withheld. A conversation postponed. A truth admitted. An apology offered. A boundary established. A decision made. Daniel finally understood the lesson. People often think their lives change because of one enormous decision. Sometimes they do. But more often, life changes because of dozens of tiny decisions that seem insignificant when they're made. He could have signed the document. He could have stayed silent. He could have blamed Rachel. He could have protected Marcus. He could have allowed guilt to make his choices. Instead, he had started asking questions, and those questions had changed everything. Rachel stepped onto the porch. "You coming inside?" "In a minute." She sat beside him. "Thinking?" "Always." She smiled. "What about?" Daniel looked at her. "The courtroom." Rachel waited. "I keep thinking about what I said. I trust my wife." "Yeah." Daniel smiled. "It sounds like such a big statement." It was. But it wasn't really about you. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "What?" "It was about what you've shown me." Rachel smiled. Daniel continued. "You didn't earn my trust by always agreeing with me." He took her hand. "You earned it by telling me the truth." Rachel squeezed his fingers. "That's what marriage should be." Daniel nodded. "Yeah." They sat together, in silence. No grand promises. No perfect ending. Just two people who had learned that love was strongest when it left room for honesty. And Daniel knew there was still work ahead. His relationship with Marcus would need time. His relationship with his mother would need patience. The property issue wasn't completely finished, and some wounds wouldn't disappear simply because the judge had spoken. But Daniel wasn't afraid of that anymore. Because he had finally learned something his younger self had never understood. You don't protect a relationship by avoiding every difficult truth. You protect it by making the relationship strong enough to survive the truth. And that lesson would shape everything Daniel did from that point forward. But one final choice remained. He had told the truth. He had protected his marriage. He had faced his family. Now he had to decide whether forgiveness could exist without surrendering the boundaries he had fought so hard to build. Because sometimes the hardest part of standing up for yourself isn't saying no. It's deciding what you're willing to say yes to afterward. 3 months after the court ruling, Daniel learned something nobody had warned him about. Winning the truth didn't automatically make life peaceful. The paperwork was settled. The legal dispute had ended. The property had been placed under a new arrangement that protected everyone's legitimate interests. Daniel was no longer financially exposed to a decision he had never authorized. On paper, everything looked resolved. But families don't live on paper. They live in memories, in expectations, in old habits, in things people said and couldn't take back, and in the silence that sometimes followed an apology that hadn't yet been accepted. Daniel's relationship with Marcus was improving, slowly. They spoke occasionally. They had even had lunch twice. But they weren't the brothers they had been before the dispute. And Daniel wasn't sure they ever should be. Before everything happened, they had mistaken closeness for trust. Now, they were learning something different. Trust had to be rebuilt. It couldn't simply be demanded because they shared a last name. Their mother was also trying. She called Daniel more carefully now. Instead of saying, "You need to come over," she asked, "Are you free this weekend?" Instead of assuming Daniel would agree, she asked what he thought. The changes were small, almost invisible, but Daniel noticed every one. One Saturday morning, Elaine called. "Daniel." "Yeah, Mom. I was wondering if you and Rachel would come for dinner tomorrow." Daniel smiled. "Sure." There was a pause. Then she added, "If you're busy, that's okay." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'll check with Rachel." "Of course." They ended the call. Daniel sat quietly for a moment. Rachel walked into the room. He nodded. "Dinner tomorrow." Rachel smiled. "Okay." Daniel looked at her. She asked, instead of assuming. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Growth. That's what I thought." They both laughed. But Daniel knew better than to believe one changed conversation meant everything was fixed. Growth wasn't proven by one good moment. It was proven by repetition. And Daniel had learned that from Rachel. That evening, Daniel found Marcus's name on his phone. He stared at it for a few seconds. Then he called. Marcus answered. "Hey! Hey!" There was a pause. "What's up?" "I wanted to check on you." Marcus laughed. "That's new." Daniel smiled. "Don't get used to it." They talked for a few minutes. Work, the property, their mother, nothing important. Then Marcus said, "Daniel?" "Yeah." "I've been thinking." "That's dangerous." Marcus laughed, then became serious. "I owe Rachel an apology." Daniel sat up. "What happened?" "Nothing." Marcus paused. "I just realized something." "What?" "I blamed her for changing you." Daniel didn't respond. Marcus continued. "But she didn't change you." Daniel listened. "You changed yourself." There was something powerful about hearing those words from his brother. Daniel looked toward the window. "Thanks. I was wrong." "Yeah." Marcus laughed softly. "I figured you'd say that." "Someone had to." Another pause. Then Marcus said, "I don't expect her to forgive me." Daniel answered honestly. "She might not right away." "I understand." "And you shouldn't expect it." "I don't." Daniel nodded. That was another lesson. An apology wasn't a transaction. You didn't apologize to purchase forgiveness. You apologized because the other person deserved acknowledgement. What they did with it afterward belonged to them. The next day, Daniel and Rachel went to Elaine's house. The dinner was quiet at first. Elaine had prepared roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The same meal she had made dozens of times. Marcus arrived 10 minutes late. He apologized. Their mother smiled. "It's okay." Daniel noticed something. Nobody criticized Marcus for being late. Nobody made excuses for him either. The old family patterns were changing. Slowly. After dinner, Elaine brought out dessert. Everyone sat around the table. Then she said, "I want to say something." Daniel looked at her. Marcus put his fork down. Elaine folded her hands. "I've been thinking about what happened." Nobody spoke. I made mistakes. Daniel remained quiet. Elaine looked at him. I thought keeping the family together meant keeping everyone from disagreeing. Daniel listened. I thought if I could make you boys stop fighting, everything would be okay. Her eyes filled with tears. But I think I taught both of you that disagreement was dangerous. Marcus looked down. Elaine continued. And I blamed Rachel for something she didn't cause. Rachel's expression softened. Elaine turned toward her. I'm sorry. Rachel took a breath. Thank you. Elaine nodded. I don't expect you to forget. Rachel shook her head. I won't. Daniel looked at his wife. That answer was honest, and somehow it made the apology more meaningful. Rachel wasn't pretending everything was fine. She was simply acknowledging the effort. Elaine reached across the table. I want us to have a relationship. Rachel nodded. I want that too. But slowly. Rachel smiled. Slowly is okay. Daniel watched them. Something inside him loosened. Not because the past had disappeared, because everyone was finally allowed to acknowledge it. Later, while Rachel helped Elaine in the kitchen, Daniel stepped outside with Marcus. The evening air was cool. Marcus leaned against the porch railing. She's different. Daniel smiled. Who? Yeah. Marcus nodded. I think we were both so busy protecting her that we never asked what she actually needed. Daniel looked at him. What do you think she needed? Us to stop lying. Daniel laughed softly. Probably. Marcus became quiet. Then he said, I've been seeing someone. Daniel looked surprised. Dating? Oh. Marcus shook his head. A counselor. Daniel smiled. Seriously? Yes. How is it? Marcus shrugged. Uncomfortable. Sounds useful. Marcus laughed. Apparently, I have control issues. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Apparently? Marcus pushed him lightly. Shut up. They laughed. It was the first time they had laughed together like brothers in a long time. Then Marcus became serious. I'm trying to understand why I thought I had to fix everything. Daniel nodded. I know. I thought being the oldest meant being responsible for everyone. Daniel looked at him. You never had to be. I know that now. They stood quietly. Then Marcus said, I also realized something about you. What? You were never weak. Daniel frowned. What? I used to think you were the easy one. Daniel smiled. I know, but you weren't easy. Marcus looked toward the house. You were patient. Daniel considered that. There's a difference. Yeah. Marcus nodded. I understand that now. Daniel didn't know what to say. So he simply said, thanks. That night, after they returned home, Rachel noticed Daniel was unusually quiet. What are you thinking about? Marcus. Good conversation? Yeah. She smiled. I'm glad. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. Do you think I should forgive him? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, do you want to? Daniel thought about it. I think so. Then maybe you should. But what if forgiving him means letting him off the hook? Rachel shook her head. It doesn't. Daniel looked at her. You can forgive someone and still expect different behavior. He nodded. Forgiveness isn't permission. No. She sat beside him. And reconciliation isn't automatic. Daniel listened. You can forgive someone and still keep boundaries. He looked at her. Have you forgiven Marcus? Rachel smiled faintly. I'm working on it. Daniel nodded. She continued. Forgiveness takes time when trust has been damaged. Daniel looked down. I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't. I mean it. I know. She touched his shoulder. Daniel, I don't need you to tell me how I should feel. That's fair. You've learned. So have you. Rachel laughed. Maybe. They sat together quietly. Then Daniel asked, Are you happy? Rachel looked at him. Yes. Even after everything? Yes. Why? She smiled. Because everything didn't destroy us. Daniel nodded. But it changed us. Good. He smiled. Good? Yes. Rachel looked at him. Before all this, we loved each other. Daniel waited. Now we know how to protect that love. Months earlier, Daniel had believed that protecting his marriage meant keeping his family from upsetting Rachel. Now he understood that it meant something else. It meant making sure the marriage had room for two independent people. It meant allowing Rachel to disagree with him. It meant accepting that she could be hurt without needing him to immediately fix everything. It meant telling her the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable. It meant respecting her boundaries the same way he expected her to respect his. And perhaps most importantly, it meant refusing to make her responsible for his choices. That night, Daniel opened the drawer where he had kept the original property documents. He took them out. For a moment, he looked at the signature line. The line he had refused to sign. He remembered how insignificant that decision had seemed. A few seconds, a pen, a question, nothing dramatic. Yet that small refusal had forced him to confront everything he had spent years avoiding. Daniel folded the documents and put them away. Rachel watched him. Why are you keeping those? To remind myself. Of what? That sometimes the most important decision is the one nobody notices. Rachel nodded. Then she took his hand. The following Sunday, Daniel's mother invited everyone to lunch. This time, there was no legal discussion. No property documents, no arguments, just food. At one point, Elaine looked around the table. I never thought we'd sit together like this again. Marcus smiled. Neither did I. Daniel looked at Rachel. She smiled. But Daniel knew this wasn't a perfect ending. There would be disagreements again. There would be misunderstandings. Someone would eventually say something careless. Someone would disappoint someone else. That was life. The goal wasn't to create a family where nobody ever hurt anyone. That wasn't realistic. The goal was to build relationships where people could address hurt without destroying each other. Daniel had finally learned that. And the lesson extended beyond family. At work, in friendships, in marriage, in every relationship. Boundaries weren't walls. They were instructions. They told people where respect had to begin. And trust wasn't something you demanded because someone loved you. It was something you built by consistently becoming the kind of person another human being could safely believe. Daniel looked around the table. His mother, his brother, his wife. 3 relationships that had been changed by one decision. And he realized the story wasn't really about a courtroom. The courtroom had simply forced everyone to stop pretending. The real story had begun much earlier, with a man who almost signed something because saying no felt uncomfortable. With a woman who refused to control his choices. With a brother who confused responsibility with control. With a mother who confused family unity with silence. And with a marriage that survived because love left room for truth. Daniel squeezed Rachel's hand beneath the table. She looked at him. He smiled. For once, there was nothing he needed to explain. But there was still one final lesson Daniel hadn't completely learned. He had spent years learning how to say no. Now he needed to learn how to say yes again. Not out of guilt, not out of fear, but freely. And that final choice would determine what kind of man, husband, son, and brother he would become. 6 months after the courtroom battle ended, Daniel found himself standing in the same grocery store where everything had quietly begun. He had stopped there after work to pick up a few things Rachel had written on a list. Milk, eggs, coffee, bread, and, in Rachel's handwriting at the bottom, don't forget the strawberries this time. Daniel smiled. He had forgotten them twice already. As he pushed the cart through the produce section, his phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. Mom. For a moment, Daniel simply stared at the name. There was a time when seeing that name would have immediately changed his breathing. He would wonder what she needed, whether Marcus was involved, whether he had done something wrong, whether he should answer immediately. Now, he simply asked himself a different question. Do I want to answer right now? That question represented months of growth. Not because Daniel loved his mother less, because he had finally learned that being available and being responsible for everything were 2 different things. He answered, Hey, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice sounded warm. I hope I'm not interrupting. Daniel smiled. You're okay. I wanted to ask you something. What is it? Would you and Rachel come by Sunday? Daniel glanced at the clock. I'll ask her. His mother paused. Of course. Daniel smiled. He remembered how different that sentence would have sounded a year earlier. Before, his mother would have assumed. Now, she asked. The difference was small, but small differences were exactly what had changed their family. Sunday works, Daniel said. Good. There was another pause. Then Elaine said, Daniel? Yeah. I'm proud of you. Daniel stopped walking. The grocery cart rolled slightly forward before he caught it. He didn't know what to say. Thank you, Mom. I mean it. Daniel swallowed. I know. They ended the call. He stood there for a moment, surrounded by shoppers who had no idea what had just happened. Nobody applauded. Nobody noticed. Yet Daniel felt something inside him settle. That was the strange thing about growth. Sometimes, the biggest victories happened in moments that looked completely ordinary. That evening, Daniel came home with the groceries. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing a report. She looked up. Did you get everything? Daniel began unloading the bags. Almost. She looked inside. The strawberries? Daniel froze. Rachel smiled. You forgot them. I remembered them. You remembered forgetting them. Daniel laughed. That's progress. She shook her head. Go back. Now? Yes. Daniel grabbed his keys. Rachel laughed. You're actually going? You told me to. He stopped at the door, then turned around. Wait. Rachel raised an eyebrow. What? I'll go because I want to. She smiled. Good answer. Daniel left, and as he drove back to the store, he thought about how different that moment was from the man he had been a year earlier. He was still doing something for his wife, but he wasn't doing it because he feared her disappointment. He was doing it because he loved her. The action was the same. The reason was different. When Daniel returned, Rachel was preparing dinner. He placed the strawberries on the counter. Mission accomplished. She smiled. Thank you. Daniel leaned against the counter. You know what I've been thinking? Rachel looked at him. That's dangerous. He laughed. I think I finally understand the difference between obligation and love. Rachel waited. Obligation says, I have to. He paused. Love says, I choose to. Rachel smiled. That's a good distinction. Daniel nodded. For years I thought being a good son meant doing whatever Mom needed. And now? Now I think being a good son means being honest with her. Rachel nodded. And being a good brother? Being honest with Marcus. And a good husband? Daniel smiled. Being honest with you. Rachel looked at him. That sounds simple. It isn't. Oh. She returned to chopping vegetables. But it's worth it. Sunday came. Daniel and Rachel drove to Elaine's house. Marcus was already there. This time, the atmosphere felt different. Not completely comfortable, but no longer fragile. They ate lunch. They talked about work. Marcus mentioned a new project. Rachel talked about an engineering contract. Elaine complained about the price of groceries. Daniel laughed. It felt almost normal. But Daniel had learned not to fear normal. He also no longer needed normal to mean perfect. After lunch, Marcus asked Daniel to step outside. They stood on the porch. Marcus looked toward the street. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever wish you had just signed the papers? Daniel thought about it. Oh, Marcus nodded. I figured. Why? Because if you had, we'd probably still be pretending. Daniel looked at him. Maybe. Marcus sighed. I hated you for a while. Daniel nodded. I know. I thought you were choosing Rachel over me. Daniel smiled sadly. I wasn't. I know that now. Marcus looked at him. You were choosing yourself. Daniel considered the words, then nodded. Yes. Marcus smiled. I think I needed that. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Me refusing to sign? Yes. How? Marcus looked down. Because it forced me to admit I couldn't fix everything. Daniel understood. Sometimes consequences were painful, because they removed the illusion of control. Marcus continued. I spent years believing that if I took responsibility for everything, nobody else would have to suffer. Daniel nodded. But you were actually taking their choices away. Marcus looked at him. Yeah. Daniel smiled. Rachel says that. Marcus laughed. Of course she does. They stood, quietly. Then Marcus said, I trust her now. Daniel looked at him. Really? Not because she's your wife. Daniel smiled. But because I've watched how she handled everything. Daniel nodded. That's the whole point. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Rachel returned home. The house was quiet. Rachel changed into comfortable clothes. Daniel made coffee. They sat together on the back porch. The same porch where they had once argued about his family. The same porch where Daniel had asked whether she regretted marrying him. The same porch where she had told him that someone else's anger didn't automatically mean he had done something wrong. Daniel looked at her. Do you remember asking me why I always sounded guilty when I told my family no? Rachel smiled. Yes. I think I finally know why. Why? Because I thought their disappointment meant I had failed. Rachel nodded. And now? Now I know people are allowed to be disappointed. He looked toward the yard. And I'm allowed to make decisions they don't like. Rachel smiled. That's growth. Daniel laughed. I've been waiting for you to say that. She nudged his shoulder. Don't get used to it. They sat quietly. Then Daniel reached into his pocket. Rachel looked at him. What? He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She frowned. What's that? Daniel opened it. It was the grocery list from that morning. At the bottom were Rachel's words. Don't forget the strawberries this time. Rachel laughed. Why do you still have that? Daniel smiled. Because it reminds me of something. What? He looked at her. The important choices aren't always dramatic. Rachel's expression softened. Daniel continued. A year ago, I thought my life changed in a courtroom. But it didn't. He folded the paper. It changed in a car outside my mother's house. Rachel remembered. The documents. Daniel nodded. I almost signed them. You didn't. Oh. And that started everything. Yeah. Daniel looked at his wife. But even that wasn't the first choice. Rachel tilted her head. What was? Daniel thought about it. Choosing to listen. Rachel smiled. To me. To myself. She became quiet. Daniel continued. You taught me to ask myself what I actually believed before I automatically did what everyone else wanted. Rachel shook her head. I didn't teach you. You did. No. She reached for his hand. You learned. Daniel smiled. Maybe that's the difference. They sat together as the sun began to lower behind the houses. There was no dramatic music, no perfect ending, no promise that their family would never disagree again, because Daniel knew better now. Life wasn't about eliminating conflict. It was about learning how to move through it without losing your dignity. That night, Daniel went downstairs for water. He stopped at the kitchen table. For a moment, he imagined the version of himself who had sat there months earlier, surrounded by property documents. Confused, guilty. He had thought the safest thing to do was sign. Now he understood that safety and comfort were not always the same thing. Comfort had told him, don't ask questions. Responsibility had told him, understand first. Comfort had told him, keep everyone happy. Self-respect had told him, you are allowed to disagree. Fear had told him, if they are angry, you've done something wrong. Wisdom had taught him, someone else's anger is not your moral compass. Daniel smiled. Then he turned off the kitchen light. The next morning, Rachel found him making coffee. You're up early? Couldn't sleep. Why? Daniel smiled. I was thinking. Again? Again. She poured herself coffee. Daniel looked at her. I have something to say. Rachel raised an eyebrow. That sounds serious. It is. He took a breath. When I said in court that I trusted my wife, I wasn't saying you were always right. Rachel smiled. I know. I wasn't saying my family was always wrong. I know. I was saying something simpler. She waited. Daniel took her hand. I trust the person who has consistently shown me that truth matters more than winning. Rachel's eyes softened. And I trust you. Daniel smiled. Even after everything? Especially after everything. He frowned. Why, especially? Because now I know you can make difficult choices without losing yourself. Daniel nodded. That was the real ending. Not the courtroom. Not the property. Not the family dispute. The real ending was a man who had finally learned that love did not require him to surrender his judgment, and a woman who had loved him enough to let him discover that for himself. Daniel had once believed that loyalty meant standing beside people no matter what they did. Now he understood something better. Loyalty could mean telling the truth. Love could include boundaries. Forgiveness could exist without forgetting. Trust could survive disagreement. And family could be rebuilt, but only when everyone was willing to take responsibility for the choices that had damaged it. Most importantly, Daniel learned that the biggest decisions in life rarely announce themselves. Sometimes they're hidden inside ordinary moments. A phone call you almost don't answer. A question you almost don't ask. A document you almost sign. An apology you almost avoid. A truth you almost keep to yourself. Those moments seem small, but they accumulate. They shape character. They shape relationships. And eventually, they shape the life you wake up living. Daniel looked at Rachel. Ready for work? She smiled. Ready? He picked up his keys, then stopped. Wait. What? Did we need anything from the store? Rachel laughed. Don't start. Daniel grinned. Just checking. And together, they walked out the door. Not into a perfect life, into a real one. A life where they would still disagree, still make mistakes, still disappoint each other sometimes. But now they knew something they hadn't known before. They could tell the truth and stay. They could set boundaries and love. They could say no without hatred. They could say yes without fear. And when the difficult choices came, as they always would, they would face them together. Not because either one was always right, but because they had finally built something stronger than agreement. They had built trust. And sometimes, that is what real love looks like. Not fireworks. Not perfection. Not choosing one person against the entire world. Just two people choosing again and again to treat each other with honesty, dignity, patience, and respect. And that was the choice that really mattered. If Daniel's story taught us anything, it's that love doesn't require you to lose your voice, and loyalty doesn't require you to abandon the truth. Sometimes, the most important choices in life look incredibly small. A question you decide to ask. A document you refuse to sign without understanding. A boundary you finally establish. An apology you finally give. And one honest decision can change the direction of an entire family. So now, I want to hear from you. Was Daniel right to stand with the truth, even when it meant standing against his own family? And more importantly, would you have done the same? Share your answer in the comments. Your story might help someone else who is struggling with family pressure, relationship boundaries, or the fear of disappointing the people they love. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs this message, and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more powerful American love stories filled with lessons about trust, relationships, family, and life. And remember, you can love someone without agreeing with them. You can forgive someone without removing your boundaries. And you can choose yourself without abandoning the people you love. Thank you for watching. Until the next story, remember, sometimes the smallest choice becomes the decision that changes everything. Vika, share, comment, subscribe. This is Love Stories by Mr. Johnson.